They say the most devastating battlefield isn't overseas. It's at your own family dinner table. When retired Air Force mechanic Thomas Miller opened his father's will in that lawyer's office, the only thing he inherited was a set of old keys and coordinates to an abandoned airfield in Nevada. His brother laughed. His sister called it worthless. Even his teenage son looked away in embarrassment. But what no one knew was that this forgotten piece of desert held secrets that would shake the Pentagon to its core. Secrets that powerful men would kill to possess. And as the Cold War's deadliest operation comes back to haunt America 40 years later, Thomas must decide: reveal the truth his father died protecting, or become the next guardian of a legacy that could save thousands of lives. My name is Thomas Miller, and this is how I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my father was a lie. A modest suburban house stands alone in early morning light. The lawn needs mowing, the paint is fading, an American flag hangs limp beside the front door. This is a home clinging to respectability while sliding into neglect. Inside, Thomas Miller stares at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. 52 years old, his face weathered, military short gray hair, and eyes that have seen too much disappointment. His calloused hands grip the sink as he steadies himself for another day of job hunting. The sound of a door slamming echoes through the house. Thomas sighs, knowing his son has left for school without saying goodbye. Again. The kitchen is small but clean. Thomas moves with military precision, making coffee in a pot that's seen better days. A photo on the refrigerator shows a smiling woman with kind eyes. Lisa, his late wife. Beside it, a much older picture of a stern-faced man in Air Force uniform, Harold Miller, his father. Thomas opens the refrigerator, nearly empty. He closes it and instead pulls a worn envelope from his pocket. Inside, the deed to an abandoned airfield in Nevada and a set of unusual keys. His inheritance. The mortgage statement on the counter is stamped "Final Notice" in red. Thomas tucks it under a pile of other bills. The ancient pickup truck sputters to life after 3 attempts. Thomas pulls away from the house, passing a "For Sale" sign in the yard that's been there too long. At Jefferson High School, students stream toward the entrance. Thomas spots his son Michael, 16, tall and lanky, wearing headphones and a permanent scowl. Thomas rolls down the window. "Michael, I'm heading to that job interview at Carson's auto shop. Good luck on your history test." Michael barely glances at the truck. "Whatever. Wait, I was thinking maybe this weekend we could drive out to see that property Grandpa left me. Get out of town for a bit. Why would I want to see some worthless piece of desert?" Michael walks away without waiting for an answer, joining friends who cast pitying glances at the old pickup. The Carson's auto shop interview goes poorly. The manager, 30 years younger than Thomas, scrolls through his resume with obvious disinterest. "I see you worked as an Air Force mechanic for 20 years. But we're really looking for someone with formal certification in modern automotive systems. I've worked on everything from F-16 engines to experimental aircraft prototypes. I can handle a Toyota." The manager smiles thinly. "We'll keep your application on file." Thomas knows what that means. In a small diner, Thomas sits alone with coffee and a half-eaten sandwich. His phone rings, his sister Diane's name on the screen. He answers. "Thomas, I've been thinking about Dad's property. Robert and I agree you should just sell it to a developer and split whatever you get with us. It's the fair thing to do. Dad left it specifically to me, Diane, not to all of us." "Oh, please. He left you a worthless patch of desert with a falling down shed on it. Meanwhile, Robert got the coin collection and I got the savings bonds. Let's be real about what this is. Dad's final disappointment in his middle child." Thomas's jaw tightens. "I haven't even seen the property yet." "Well, don't waste gas driving out there. The attorney showed us pictures. It's nothing. Just some old airfield Dad bought at auction years ago. Probably one of his conspiracy theory investments." "I'll make my own decisions about my inheritance, Diane." "Fine, be stubborn. But Michael's college isn't going to pay for itself, and we both know the mechanic gig isn't cutting it." The call ends. Thomas stares out the window at passing cars, all newer than his. At home, Thomas sits at a small desk, studying a faded military photograph found in his father's papers. Harold Miller stands next to what appears to be an aircraft, though the background is deliberately blurred. He wears the insignia of an Air Force technical sergeant, But there's another patch on his shoulder that Thomas doesn't recognize. A silver star with wings and the partial letters STA. Thomas opens his laptop and searches Air Force Project STA 1960s. Nothing relevant appears. He tries other combinations, each yielding nothing useful. The keys from the inheritance are unlike any Thomas has seen before. Heavy brass with unusual teeth and numbers stamped into the metal. Military grade, but not standard issue. Thomas pulls out a road atlas and finds the coordinates. The property is in a remote area of Nevada, about 5 hours' drive from his home in Arizona. He traces the route with his finger, then checks his wallet. Barely enough cash for gas to get there and back. The front door opens and slams. Michael trudges in, throws his backpack on the floor. How was the test? Failed it. Who cares about the Cuban Missile Crisis anyway? Ancient history. It matters because we almost had nuclear war. The decisions people made then still affect us today. Whatever. Did you get the job? No, still looking. Michael rolls his eyes. Great. I'm serious about that trip this weekend. It would do us both good to get out of town. Maybe there's something valuable out there. Like what? Grandpa was a paranoid old repairman who fixed radios and lawnmowers. What could he possibly have that's worth anything? I don't know, but he was also an Air Force technical sergeant who worked on classified projects. There might be more to the story. Michael pauses, a flicker of interest crossing his face. What kind of classified projects? Thomas holds up the photograph. I'm not sure, but this wasn't taken at any standard Air Force base I've ever seen. Michael studies the photo. So what? It's just Grandpa standing next to some old plane? Maybe. But these keys aren't a standard. And why would he leave me an abandoned airfield unless there was something important there? Michael hands back the photo. Fine, I'll go. Not like I have plans anyway. Thomas tries to hide his smile. We'll leave Saturday morning. Early. The bank is a sterile, modern building with too much glass and not enough personality. Thomas sits across from a loan officer whose nameplate reads David Wells. The young man in an off-the-rack suit reviews Thomas's application with the kind of neutral expression that masks bad news. Mr. Miller, I wish I could help, but your current financial situation doesn't meet our criteria for a loan extension. Your income is irregular, you're already 3 months behind on your mortgage, and frankly, the property value has declined since your original purchase. Thomas leans forward. I've never missed a payment until my wife got sick. 20 years of perfect credit. Doesn't that count for anything? Wells's expression softens slightly. It does, which is why we've been as accommodating as possible, but without steady income, I have a job interview next week at Raytheon. They need experienced aircraft mechanics. Wells nods, but his eyes show he's heard similar promises before. If you secure that position, we can certainly revisit this conversation. In the meantime, I recommend you consider all your options. The implication hangs in the air. Sell the house before they take it. Outside the bank, Thomas sits in his truck, knuckles white on the steering wheel. He pulls out his phone and looks at a text from an old Air Force buddy. Raytheon looking for experienced F-16 techs. Put in a good word, interview Tuesday. His last hope, a job that would salvage his finances but require moving to another state, away from Lisa's grave, away from the life they built together. Thomas puts the phone away and pulls out the photograph of his father again. Harold Miller's stern expression reveals nothing, but those keys in Thomas's pocket suddenly feel heavier. Friday night, Thomas sits in the garage, a small workbench illuminated by a single lamp. He's cleaning and checking his old service pistol, a habit from his military days. He doesn't expect trouble, but remote Nevada isn't a place to go unprepared. A storage box labeled Harold sits open beside him. Thomas pulls out more photographs. Harold with his Air Force unit, Harold receiving a commendation, Harold standing beside men in suits with their faces now faded beyond recognition. At the bottom of the box, Thomas finds a small notebook filled with his father's precise handwriting. Most entries are mundane, maintenance schedules, parts lists, expense records. But one page catches his attention. Meeting with C&H regarding Project S status. All assets secure. Next maintenance cycle scheduled for June. Must find a more permanent solution before time runs out. The entry is dated just 3 years before Harold's death. Thomas flips through more pages, finding similar cryptic entries scattered among ordinary notes. Whatever Project S, what it was, Harold had been involved with it until the end. Another entry dated 6 months before Harold entered assisted living. T should be informed soon. The burden is too great for one man alone. But will he understand the importance? The sacrifice required? Thomas stares at his father's handwriting. T. Thomas. His father had planned to tell him something important, but then the stroke hit, robbing Harold of speech until his death 3 months ago. A knock on the garage door startles Thomas. Michael stands in the doorway looking uncomfortable. Mom's photo album is missing from the shelf. Do you know where it is? Thomas is surprised by the request. Michael hasn't looked at family photos since the funeral. I think it's in the hall closet. Top shelf. Michael nods but doesn't leave. Instead, he steps into the garage, eyes falling on the open box of Harold's belongings. Find anything interesting about Grandpa? Thomas hesitates, then hands him the notebook. There are some weird entries in here, about something called Project S. Michael flips through the pages, scanning entries. His expression shifts from boredom to mild curiosity. Project Starlight? There's a full name here. Where? Michael points to an entry Thomas missed. Project Starlight audit complete. All modifications performed to specification. Kennedy would be proud. Kennedy? Like JFK? Maybe. Thomas takes back the notebook, studying the entry. The date is 1980, decades after Kennedy's assassination. Michael picks up one of the photographs. Harold standing with 3 other men beside what appears to be a hangar, similar to the one Thomas inherited. Is this the airfield we're going to see? Could be. The background is similar to the lawyer's description. What if there's something actually valuable out there? Like some old military equipment Grandpa salvaged? Thomas smiles, only one way to find out. For a moment, father and son share something they haven't in months. Curiosity, anticipation, a common purpose. Saturday morning arrives with desert clarity. Thomas loads the truck with water, tools, and a small cooler of food. Michael slides into the passenger seat, still half asleep, clutching his phone. The drive is long and mostly silent. As they leave the city behind, the landscape transforms. Suburban sprawl giving way to smaller towns, then to open desert dotted with sagebrush and lonely gas stations. Michael finally speaks. So what's the plan if this place is just a worthless piece of land? Then we'll have had a day out together. That's worth something. Mom would have liked that. The mention of Lisa hangs between them, the first time Michael has spoken of her in months. Thomas glances at his son. You miss her. Michael stares out the window. Every day. Me too, buddy. More miles pass in silence. But it's a different kind of silence now. Shared grief rather than distance. They stop for lunch at a roadside diner. Over burgers, Thomas spreads out a map. The property should be about 30 miles ahead. According to these coordinates, it's off the main highway down a service road. Is there even a building out there? The lawyer mentioned a hangar structure. Your grandfather purchased the property in 1983 from a government auction. It was part of a decommissioned testing range. Michael shows the first real interest of the trip. Testing what? I don't know. Could have been anything during the Cold War. Aircraft, radar systems, communications equipment. Maybe there is old government stuff he scavenged. Could be worth something. Thomas smiles. Maybe, but don't get your hopes up. Michael points to a note he's made on his phone. I did some research last night. This area was used for something called the Nevada Test and Training Range. Lots of classified programs happened out there. One site was even supposed to have housed recovered UFO technology. Thomas raises an eyebrow. Please tell me you don't think your grandfather was hiding alien spaceships. Michael grins, the first genuine smile Thomas has seen in weeks. Probably not, but I bet there's something weird out there. Grandpa was always different. He was that. Not much for talking, but when he did speak, you listened. Michael nods. I remember when he showed me how to rebuild that old radio. He knew everything about electronics, but he never talked about where he learned it all. Air Force training. Maybe. But I looked up his service record online last night. Technical sergeant isn't high-ranking enough to have worked on the really classified stuff. But Grandpa's notebook mentioned Project Starlight in modifications and audits like he was in charge of something big. Thomas is surprised by his son's initiative. You did research? Michael shrugs, embarrassed by his own enthusiasm. Just curious. Back on the road, the landscape becomes increasingly desolate. They turn onto a gravel service road that stretches toward distant mountains. The truck bounces over ruts and washes. After 20 minutes, they crest a small rise. Below them spreads a flat expanse of concrete, a runway cracked and weathered by decades of sun and wind, but still recognizable. At the far end stands a massive structure, the hangar. It's huge. Michael's voice holds genuine surprise. The hangar dominates the landscape, its curved roof rising nearly 4 stories high. Once silver, the corrugated metal has weathered to a patchwork of dull gray and rust. Heavy doors face the runway, secured by chains and multiple locks. Thomas parks near the entrance. They step out into desert heat and silence. Doesn't look like anyone's been here in years. Thomas approaches the hangar doors, studying the security system. 3 separate locks secure the chains, 1 standard padlock, and 2 military-grade cylinders with unusual configurations. He tries the first key from his inheritance. No match. The second key slides into one of the military locks and turns with a solid click. The third key opens the remaining lock. As the chains fall away, Thomas braces himself against one of the massive doors and pushes. It resists, then slowly yields with a deep metallic groan that echoes across the desert. A gap appears, revealing darkness within. The air that escapes is cool and smells of metal and machine oil, not the musty abandonment Thomas expected. He pulls out a flashlight and steps inside. Michael follows closely, his earlier disinterest replaced by curiosity. The beam cuts through darkness, revealing glimpses of an enormous interior space. The hangar is cavernous, easily large enough to house multiple commercial aircraft. The concrete floor is dusty but intact, marked with faded lines and positions. But it's what's in the center that stops them cold. The flashlight beam plays across massive shapes covered by heavy canvas tarps, secured with precise care. They're clearly aircraft-sized objects, but the coverings reveal nothing about what lies beneath. Along the walls, workbenches line up in military precision. Tool racks hold equipment that gleams even in the dim light. Not the rusted remains of abandoned tools, but well-maintained instruments arranged with careful organization. This doesn't look abandoned. Michael's voice echoes in the vast space. Thomas finds a light switch and flips it, not expecting anything. To his surprise, overhead lights flicker, then illuminate the hangar in harsh fluorescent glow. The full scale of the space is now apparent. The hangar is immaculate, dusty from disuse, but organized with military precision. Besides the 2 large tarp-covered shapes in the center, smaller covered objects line the walls. A separate area appears to be a sophisticated workshop with equipment far beyond what a civilian repair shop would need. Michael pulls out his phone. No signal, but he takes photos anyway, circling the covered shapes with growing excitement. Dad, this is crazy. This place is like a museum or a lab or something. Thomas approaches one of the large covered objects. The tarp is heavy-duty canvas, secured with multiple tie-downs and sealed against dust and moisture. Help me with this. Together they begin unfastening the tie-downs. The tarp is heavier than expected, requiring both of them to pull it back. As the canvas slides away, gleaming metal appears, not the dull aluminum of a civilian aircraft, but a smooth, almost liquid-looking surface of unusual composition. The nose of the aircraft emerges first, sleek, predatory, unlike any commercial plane. Air intakes positioned in unusual configurations suggest extreme performance capabilities. As more of the tarp comes away, the distinctive shape of a military aircraft becomes clear, but with proportions and design features Thomas has never seen before. That's not a normal plane. Michael stands open-mouthed. The aircraft is approximately 60 feet long with a wingspan of similar dimension. Its design is both familiar and alien, clearly a jet, but with features decades ahead of its time. The fuselage bears the marking Aurora X1, followed by a serial number, and the faded emblem that matches the patch on Harold's uniform in the photograph, now clearly visible as a silver star with wings and the text Starlight. Thomas circles the aircraft, professional assessment replacing initial shock. This is military, but nothing I've ever worked on or even seen in manuals. The design it's not like anything in current service. Is it like a stealth bomber or something? Similar principles in some ways, but different execution. I don't even know what this is. They continue uncovering the aircraft, revealing a cockpit with instrumentation far more sophisticated than expected for its apparent age. The canopy is tinted with an unusual metallic hue. Wing surfaces show no conventional control of surfaces, but instead appear to be composed of sections that could change shape entirely. As the last of the tarp comes away, they step back to take in the full aircraft. It sits in perfect preservation, not a project or a relic, but a maintained operational craft. Michael runs his hand along the fuselage. The metal feels strangely warm. What's it made of? Thomas shakes his head. Not standard aluminum, some kind of composite or alloy I'm not familiar with. Behind the main cockpit section, the fuselage expands into what appears to be a cargo area with specialized fittings along the walls, attachment points for equipment or supplies. At the rear, engine housings of unusual designs suggest propulsion systems beyond conventional turbojets. Thomas finds an access panel and carefully opens it. Inside, the components are pristine, showing signs of regular maintenance rather than decades of neglect. Someone's been taking care of this. Recently. But Grandpa died 3 months ago. Thomas nods slowly. And before that, he was in assisted living for 6 months. Someone else has been here. Is that legal? If Grandpa owned these planes and now you own them, I don't know. These aren't normal aircraft. They look experimental, possibly classified. Normal rules might not apply. Michael circles the aircraft, taking photos from every angle. This thing must be worth millions. We need to find out what it is. Thomas examines the cockpit more closely. The control systems are unlike any he's seen, a hybrid of traditional flight controls and what appears to be computerized interfaces far beyond the technology available when the aircraft was likely built. The fuel systems, visible through inspection panels, are equally unusual. Not standard jet fuel tanks, but a complex arrangement of cells with specialized containment and distribution mechanisms. This is designed for extreme speed and altitude. Thomas points to elements of the engine housing. See these intakes and the exhaust configuration? This isn't just supersonic. This is hypersonic design, meaning it's built to fly many times the speed of sound. Mach 5 or higher, is that even possible? Not with any aircraft I've ever worked on. But this is something else entirely. As they continue exploring, they find a separated area in the rear of the hangar, a fully equipped office and communications center. Filing cabinets line one wall. A sophisticated radio setup occupies another. A desk holds technical manuals and logbooks, all meticulously organized. Thomas opens one of the logbooks. Inside, in his father's precise handwriting, are detailed maintenance records dating back to 1983. Regular entries documenting systems checks, component replacements, and operational readiness assessments. The most recent entry is dated just 4 months ago, shortly before Harold entered assisted living. Monthly systems check complete. All parameters nominal. Fuel cells purged and preserved. Avionics powered and verified. Both Aurora units remain mission capable. Next maintenance cycle due in 30 days. Both units. Thomas looks toward the second covered shape across the hangar floor. There are 2 of them. Michael is already moving toward the second tarp. Let's see. The process is faster now that they know what to expect. The second aircraft is nearly identical to the first, with subtle differences in the cargo area configuration and slightly different markings. Aurora X-2, 2 experimental hypersonic aircraft, hidden in Nevada for decades, maintained in perfect condition. Thomas feels the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. Michael opens a drawer in the desk and pulls out a folder labeled Flight Operations. Inside are mission logs with dates spanning from 1962 to 1967, detailed records of test flights, performance metrics, and cryptic mission designations. Dad, look at this. Someone was flying these things in the 60s. Thomas examines the logs. The performance data is astonishing. Sustained speeds of Mach 6, operational ceilings above 100,000 feet, range capabilities that would allow non-stop global transit. This can't be right. Nothing flew like this in the 60s. Nothing flies like this now. Another drawer contains personnel files, photographs and dossiers of pilots and engineers assigned to Project Starlight. Thomas recognizes his father immediately, much younger but with the same serious expression. His title, Chief Systems Engineer, Aurora Platform. Michael points to the photo. Grandpa wasn't just some repair guy. He was leading this whole thing. But why would a chief engineer end up running a small-town repair shop? And why keep these aircraft hidden for decades? Thomas continues searching through files while Michael explores the rest of the office. In a locked-in cabinet that yields to another key from the inheritance, Thomas finds a folder marked Executive Authorization. Inside is a memorandum on White House letterhead, dated October 15, 1962. Project Starlight is hereby authorized as a presidential special access program. The Aurora platform will be developed for rapid global humanitarian response capability with the highest national priority. The ability to deliver critical aid to any location worldwide without detection is essential to our national security strategy in this time of increasing tension. This program will operate outside standard military chain of command, reporting directly to this office. The signature at the bottom, John F. Kennedy. Thomas stares at the document, trying to process its implications. A secret program, personally authorized by Kennedy, to develop aircraft capable of delivering humanitarian aid anywhere in the world without detection. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Michael calls from across the room, "Dad, there's something you need to see." He's found a small safe behind a false panel in the wall. The combination lock has a keypad rather than a dial, technology too advanced for the 1960s. "I don't have the combination." Michael studies the keypad, 6 digits. What numbers would Grandpa use? Something he wouldn't forget. Thomas thinks for a moment. Try 101562. Michael punches in the numbers. The safe clicks open. "How did you know?" October 15, 1962, the date on Kennedy's authorization. Inside the safe are more documents, a small hard drive, and a DVD in a case labeled "For Thomas, when the time comes." A message from my father. Thomas holds the disc, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The office includes a small computer setup that appears to have been updated regularly. Thomas powers it on, finding it password protected. Another combination to crack. Michael is already typing. Starlight. The screen comes to life, showing a desktop with carefully organized folders labeled with maintenance schedules, inventory lists, and personnel records. Lucky guess? Michael shrugs. It was on everything else in here. Thomas inserts the DVD. A video player launches automatically. The screen remains black for a moment, then Harold Miller's face appears. He looks tired, much older than the man in the photographs, but his eyes are clear and determined. "Thomas, if you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you found the hangar. I've been waiting for this moment, dreading it and hoping for it at the same time. There's so much to explain and so little time." Harold adjusts his position, glancing off-camera briefly. "What you've discovered isn't just aircraft. It's a legacy, a responsibility, and maybe the most important humanitarian tool ever developed." Project Starlight began in 1962, during the darkest days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy feared nuclear war was imminent, and he wanted a way to help survivors if the worst happened. A rescue system that could reach any point on Earth without being detected by Soviet defenses. Harold's expression softens with pride. "We built something extraordinary. Aircraft capable of speeds and altitudes no one thought possible, using materials and propulsion systems decades ahead of their time. The Aurora platforms could deliver medical supplies, food, or extraction teams to disaster areas anywhere on the planet within hours, completely undetected by radar or other surveillance." His expression darkens. After Kennedy's assassination, everything changed. New leadership saw the Aurora's potential for weapons delivery rather than humanitarian aid. They wanted to convert our rescue vehicles into first-strike nuclear delivery systems that could penetrate Soviet defenses. Many on the team agreed. It was the height of the Cold War, and fear was a powerful motivator. Harold sits straighter, a flash of defiance crossing his face. "A few of us refused. We had built these aircraft to save lives, not end them. When we voiced our objections, the program was officially terminated. All assets were ordered destroyed. Thomas and Michael exchanged glances, the weight of historical significance settling over them. With help from sympathetic officials who shared Kennedy's original vision, we faked the destruction records. The two surviving prototypes were quietly transferred to private ownership, my ownership, through a series of complex legal arrangements. For over 40 years, I've maintained these aircraft in operational condition, waiting for a time when they could fulfill their original purpose. Harold leans closer to the camera, his voice more urgent. Thomas, you're now the legal owner of the Aurora aircraft and all associated technology. The trust documents are in order. The maintenance logs are complete. But ownership comes with responsibility. These aircraft were built to help people in crisis, not for profit or military advantage. What you do with them will determine whether my life's work was worthwhile or wasted. A sound off camera causes Harold to look up. He returns to the camera with increased urgency. There are people who still want this technology for weapons applications. Defense contractors who would pay millions for just a fraction of what's in that hangar. They've been searching for decades, and they're getting closer. The documents in the safe will explain everything: the legal ownership, the trust arrangements, and the protocols for different scenarios. Harold's expression softens one last time. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I wanted to tell you so many times, but the fewer people who knew, the safer the aircraft remained. I may have seemed distant, preoccupied, even cold, but everything I did was to protect something important, something that could save thousands of lives someday. Now that protection falls to you, I trust you'll make the right choices. The screen goes black. Thomas and Michael sit in silence, the weight of Harold's words hanging in the air. Michael speaks first. Holy shit. Thomas nods slowly, still processing. My father spent his entire life protecting experimental aircraft that could change disaster response worldwide. And now they're yours. Thomas is about to respond when the sound of an approaching vehicle breaks the silence. He moves quickly to the partially open hangar door and peers out. A black SUV with government plates pulls up beside their truck. A man in his 70s steps out, tall, military-bearing despite his age, with silver hair and the confident movement of someone used to command. Thomas instinctively reaches for the service pistol at his back, then stops. Something about the man seems familiar. Stay here. Thomas steps through the door into the sunlight. The man approaches with a slight smile. He wears civilian clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt, but carries himself like a soldier. Thomas Miller? Richard Coleman. I served with your father. Coleman extends his hand. Thomas shakes it cautiously. How did you know I was here? Those locks are connected to a silent alert system. When they're opened, certain people get notified. I was the closest. Thomas studies the man's face. You're not here to run me off? Coleman laughs. No, son. Quite the opposite. I've been waiting for this day for almost 40 years. Michael appears in the doorway, curiosity overcoming caution. Coleman smiles at him. You must be Michael. You look like your grandfather when he was young. Inside the hangar, Coleman walks around the uncovered aircraft with the familiarity of someone returning to an old friend. He runs his hand along the fuselage with obvious affection. Beautiful, isn't she? The Aurora X-1, fastest high-altitude transport ever built, capable of reaching any point on Earth within 3 hours while carrying 2 tons of cargo, and nearly invisible to radar. Thomas watches Coleman carefully. What exactly was my father involved in? Coleman turns to face Thomas fully. Your father wasn't just involved, son. Harold Miller was the chief engineer and maintenance officer for Operation Starlight, the most advanced humanitarian air transport system ever developed by the United States military. Humanitarian? This thing looks like a bomber. Coleman shakes his head. That was the genius of it. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, your father was part of a team tasked with developing an aircraft that could deliver critical medical supplies, food, and rescue personnel to disaster areas or conflict zones without being detected or intercepted. The perfect rescue vehicle for a world on the brink of war. Thomas frowns. If this was a legitimate military project, why is it hidden in an abandoned hangar in the middle of nowhere? Coleman's expression grows serious, because not everyone wanted these aircraft used for humanitarian purposes. He gestures for them to follow him to the office area. From his pocket, he produces a key that opens a locked cabinet Thomas hadn't examined yet. Inside are dozens of files with classified markings, some with the presidential seal. Operation Starlight began as President Kennedy's personal project, a way to extend America's helping hand to any corner of the globe, regardless of Cold War politics. The Aurora aircraft were designed to enter hostile or contested airspace without detection, deliver life-saving supplies, and extract wounded civilians or personnel. Coleman pulls out a folder containing photographs. The Aurora aircraft dropping pallets of supplies, medical teams deploying from its cargo bay, injured civilians being loaded aboard. We ran test missions in remote areas, drought relief in North Africa, medical supply delivery after earthquakes in South America. The aircraft performed perfectly. Michael leans forward, genuinely engaged. So what went wrong? Coleman's face darkens. Kennedy was assassinated. New leadership saw different potential in the Aurora's capabilities. If it could deliver medicine undetected, it could deliver weapons, Thomas finishes. Precisely. By 1967, there was a push to convert the Aurora fleet into first-strike infiltration bombers that could penetrate Soviet airspace carrying tactical nuclear weapons. Your father and several others refused to participate. Coleman pulls another document from the file, an official termination order dated 1968. The project was officially canceled. All aircraft and related materials were ordered destroyed. The entire program was buried under national security classifications so deep that most people who knew about it thought it had been executed. But it wasn't, Thomas says. Coleman smiles grimly. Your father and 4 other senior engineers couldn't bear to destroy what they'd built for saving lives. With help from sympathetic officials, they faked the destruction records. The 2 surviving prototypes were quietly transferred to private ownership through a series of shell companies and trust arrangements. For what purpose? Coleman walks back to the aircraft, gesturing at its sleek lines, to preserve them for their original humanitarian mission. Your father believed that someday the political climate would change, and these aircraft could serve their intended purpose, reaching disaster victims no other aircraft could reach, delivering aid no other system could provide. Thomas shakes his head in disbelief. My father was a small-town repairman. Coleman laughs. Your father was one of the finest aeronautical engineers the Air Force ever produced. His repair shop provided cover for his real work, maintaining these aircraft in operational condition for over 40 years. Michael circles the aircraft, running his hand along its surface with newfound respect. So Grandpa was, what, some kind of secret hero? Coleman nods. Harold Miller could have had a lucrative career with any aerospace company. Instead, he chose to live modestly so he could protect these aircraft and their humanitarian potential. Every month he drove out here and performed maintenance. Every system on these aircraft is flight ready. Thomas stares at the aircraft with new understanding. The silent, distant father he thought he knew transforms in his mind. Not an emotionally stunted repairman, but a man carrying an enormous secret responsibility. How many people know about this place? Coleman considers. The original team is mostly gone now. There are perhaps a dozen people still alive who know the full story, former project members, a few officials who've helped protect the program over the decades. When your father fell ill, we had to send in other technicians for the maintenance cycles. Thomas turns to Coleman, suspicion returning. Why are you telling me all this? Why not just take the aircraft now that my father's gone? Coleman meets his gaze steadily. Because Harold made arrangements long ago, he legally owned these aircraft through a special trust. You've inherited not just the physical assets, but the mission that went with them. The question is, what will you do with them? Thomas studies Coleman's face, looking for deception but finding only earnest concern. What would you do if you were me? Coleman smiles sadly. I'd honor your father's legacy. These aircraft were designed to save lives. In a world of increasing natural disasters, refugee crises, and humanitarian emergencies, their capabilities are more relevant than ever. What are they worth? Michael asks bluntly. Coleman's expression hardens. To defense contractors who want the stealth and propulsion technology, easily $130 million each. But your grandfather didn't preserve them for profit. Thomas is about to respond when the radio equipment in the office area crackles to life. A woman's voice, professional and urgent, fills the hangar. Starlight Base, this is Control. We have a situation developing. Unauthorized access detected in primary database. Security protocols engaged. Require immediate status confirmation on assets. Repeat, require immediate status confirmation. Coleman moves quickly to the radio. His expression has changed from nostalgic to alert. Control, this is Coleman at Starlight Base. What's happening? Sentinel Systems detected database intrusion approximately 20 minutes ago. Aerodyine Corporation, security team accessing classified Starlight files. They know about the Aurora assets. Satellite shows vehicles moving toward your location. ETA 40 minutes. Coleman's face hardens. Understood. Initiating Protocol 3. He turns to Thomas and Michael, all pretense of casual reminiscence gone. We need to move quickly. Aerodyne is a defense contractor that's been trying to locate these aircraft for years. They want the technology for military applications. If they get here before we secure the situation, you'll lose everything your father worked to protect. Thomas feels the weight of decision pressing down on him. His father's secret life, the aircraft's humanitarian purpose, the approaching threat, it's overwhelming. What exactly is Protocol 3? Coleman is already moving toward the aircraft, his movements precise and practiced. We secure all documentation and prepare the assets for potential relocation. Your father created contingency plans for exactly this situation. Thomas makes a decision. Whatever his father was involved in, he wouldn't have dedicated his life to it without good reason. Tell me what to do. Coleman moves with the practiced efficiency of a man who's rehearsed this scenario many times. He pulls a large rolling case from beneath one of the workbenches and begins filling it with the most critical documentation: maintenance logs, technical schematics, and the trust documents. Take these files in the hard drive. They contain everything about the Aurora's legal status and maintenance requirements. Get them to your truck now. Thomas hesitates, struggling with the sudden shift from discovery to crisis. How did Aerodyne find out about this place? Coleman's expression darkens. We've had a security breach in the Starlight network. Someone with inside access has been selling information. We've suspected it for months but couldn't identify the source. Michael is already gathering the computer hard drive and Harold's DVD. What about the aircraft? We can't exactly drive them out of here. Coleman pulls a tarp from a smaller object in the corner of the hangar, revealing a sophisticated electronic device with multiple antennas and a digital display. This is a signal jammer. It will buy us time by blocking their satellite communications and GPS. We need to establish our legal position before they arrive. Legal position? Thomas questions. We're standing in a hangar with 2 experimental aircraft that officially don't exist. Coleman hands Thomas a sealed envelope from the safe. Your father's contingency instructions. Read them. Quickly. Thomas tears open the envelope. Inside is a single sheet of paper with Harold's precise handwriting. Thomas, if you're reading this, Protocol 3 has been activated, meaning immediate threats to the Aurora assets. The most important thing is to establish legal possession. Call Eleanor Wright at the number below. Tell her October contingency is active. She'll initiate the legal protocols. Then call Senator Frank Harrison. He's been protecting the program politically since 1968. Do not surrender the aircraft to anyone without proper authentication codes. Coleman knows them. Trust him with your life, as I have. At the bottom are 2 phone numbers, followed by a sequence of letters and numbers labeled Authentication Code Series. Thomas pulls out his phone. No signal. The radio crackles again. Control's voice sounds tense. Coleman, satellite shows 3 vehicles approaching from the South Access Road. Approximately 32 minutes until contact. We're monitoring Aerodyne communications. They're calling this a recovery operation of abandoned government property. Coleman's jaw tightens. They're trying to establish a claim before we can assert legal ownership. He turns to Michael, who's been photographing documents on his phone. Son, I need you to go to the South Ridge. There's a transmission booster there that will give you cell signal. Call both these numbers. Tell them exactly what your father wrote. Nothing more, nothing less. Thomas interjects. I'm not sending my son out there alone with Aerodyne closing in. Coleman's expression softens slightly. The ridge is 2 miles in the opposite direction from their approach. He'll be safe, and we need those calls made now. The legal team has to file emergency injunctions before Aerodyne can establish possession. Michael takes the paper from Thomas, determination replacing fear. I can do it. Which way to the ridge? Coleman points. Follow the old access road past the runway. There's a small equipment shed at the base of the ridge. The booster looks like a weather station. The password to activate it is Kennedy 63. Thomas grips his son's shoulder. Be careful. If you see anyone, hide. Call, then come straight back. Michael nods, suddenly looking older than his 16 years. I've got this, Dad. As Michael slips out the side door, Thomas turns back to Coleman. What aren't you telling me? Coleman pauses in his document gathering. Your father wasn't just protecting these aircraft because they could save lives. He was protecting them because in the wrong hands, they could start World War III. The security jammer emits a low hum as Coleman activates it. Status lights blink green, then red. That should disrupt their communications and buy us some time. Now, I need to show you something your father never revealed to anyone outside the original team. Coleman leads Thomas to the Aurora X-1 and points to a nearly invisible access panel beneath the cockpit. It requires 2 keys turned simultaneously to open. One from Coleman's pocket, one from the set Thomas inherited. This is why these aircraft were never destroyed, despite direct orders from the Pentagon. The panel slides open, revealing a small compartment containing what appears to be a modified data module with 1960s-era components intermingled with more modern electronics. What am I looking at? Coleman's voice drops. The Aurora's navigation system contains core programming written by your father. It includes operational constraints that cannot be overridden. The aircraft physically cannot deploy offensive weapons or conduct surveillance operations. Thomas stares at the module. My father built a moral compass into the aircraft's DNA. Coleman nods. Harold created a navigation system that would accept humanitarian mission parameters, but reject any attempts to reprogram it for weapons delivery. It was his insurance policy. Even if the aircraft were captured, they couldn't be weaponized. This is why Aerodyne wants them so badly. They've been trying to crack this system for decades. With these prototypes, they could reverse engineer it. Thomas studies the module, but technology has advanced. Couldn't they just replace the entire system? Coleman shakes his head. The integration is complete. Navigation, propulsion, flight controls. Replace one system and the aircraft becomes inoperable. Your father was brilliant. He designed it so the Aurora's unique capabilities cannot be separated from its humanitarian purpose. Why didn't he tell anyone? The Pentagon would have found a way around it if they knew. Only the core team was aware. After the program was officially terminated, we let everyone believe these were just extremely advanced transport aircraft. The truth about the programming constraints was Harold's ace in the hole. Thomas feels a surge of pride in his father's foresight and principles. In the distance, the faint sound of vehicles reaches them. Coleman checks his watch. They're making better time than expected. We need to prepare for contact. He pulls a worn leather case from another locked cabinet. Inside is a satellite phone and a small recording device. This is a direct line to NORAD command. If all else fails, we call in official military intervention. But that's a last resort. Once the Pentagon gets involved, these aircraft might disappear into classified storage forever. Thomas feels the weight of responsibility growing. The security protocols, legal contingencies, recording devices. His father had prepared for every scenario. Coleman hands Thomas a set of credentials with official government seals. Put these in your pocket. They establish you as the legal custodian of the Aurora platform under Executive Order 36, signed by Kennedy before his death. It's still technically valid since it was never officially rescinded. Thomas examines the credentials. They look authentic, though the security format is decades old. Will these hold up? Against corporate security? Absolutely. Against federal marshals or military personnel? Long enough for our legal team to intervene. The radio crackles again. Control's voice is tense. Coleman, be advised. Satellite shows 3 black SUVs have turned onto your access road. ETA now 15 minutes. We've identified Marcus Steele leading the Aerodyne team. Coleman's expression hardens. Steele. Of course. Who's Steele? former Special Forces, now Aerodyne's head of special acquisitions. He specializes in recovering misplaced government assets. He's been hunting the Aurora platform for years. Coleman moves to a cabinet and pulls out what appears to be a standard camera, but with unusual modifications to the lens and housing. Your father developed this. It records and transmits everything to secure servers maintained by our legal team. Put it on and keep it running. Thomas attaches the camera to his shirt pocket. What's our strategy? Delay. Establish legal possession. Document everything. The Aurora aircraft are legally yours through the trust your father established. We just need to hold that position until our legal team can file the necessary paperwork. Thomas glances toward the hangar door. What if they don't care about legal paperwork? Coleman's expression is grim. Then we move to Protocol 4. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles grows louder. Thomas secures the authentication documents in his pocket and tries to calm his racing heart. Whatever his father had been protecting all these years, the moment of truth had arrived. Thomas and Coleman position themselves near the main hangar doors, the partly uncovered Aurora X-1 gleaming behind them. Thomas feels exposed, outnumbered, but Coleman's steady presence provides reassurance. 3 black SUVs pull up in a carefully orchestrated formation, one directly in front of the hangar, the others angled to block any potential exit routes. The vehicles bear no government markings, only the subtle Aerodyine corporate logo on their doors. 6 men exit the vehicles with practiced precision, fanning out in a security perimeter. They wear tactical gear without insignia, civilian contractors playing at being military. From the lead SUV, a tall man emerges. His bearing suggests military background, but his tailored suit and manicured appearance speak of corporate power. This must be Marcus Steele, Coleman whispers. Let me handle the initial contact. Remember, everything is being recorded. Steele approaches with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. 2 security personnel flank him at a respectful distance. Colonel Coleman, it's been, 15 years? Quaid, wasn't it? Coleman's posture remains rigid, 18 years. And it's retired, Colonel. Steele smiles without warmth. Once a colonel, always a colonel, and this must be Thomas Miller, Harold's son. He extends his hand. Thomas hesitates, then shakes it briefly. Mr. Miller, I'm Marcus Steele, Director of Special Assets Recovery for Aerodyne Defense Systems. I'm here representing the United States government to recover classified aerospace technology currently being stored at this location without proper authorization. Thomas maintains eye contact. This property and everything in it belongs to me through legal inheritance from my father, who held clear title. Steele's smile doesn't waver. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The items in question are classified military assets that were never decommissioned or released for private ownership. I have documentation authorizing their immediate recovery. He holds up an official-looking folder with government seals. Coleman interjects. We also have documentation establishing legal ownership through a presidential authorization that was never rescinded. Perhaps we should let the courts decide. Steele's expression hardens slightly. The courts aren't equipped to handle matters of national security. Colonel, you know that better than most. He turns to Thomas. Mr. Miller, I understand this is surprising. Your father likely didn't inform you about the classified nature of these assets. We're prepared to offer compensation for any inconvenience. Say $5 million for your cooperation today. Thomas feels a flash of anger. My father spent 40 years protecting these aircraft. They're worth a lot more than $5 million. Steele's smile returns. So you do understand their value. $10 million then, cash transfer by close of business today. Coleman places a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Mr. Miller isn't interested in selling national treasures to private defense contractors, Steele. The Aurora platform was designed for humanitarian missions, not for weapons delivery systems. Steele's expression shifts subtly. The designation Aurora is itself classified. Your use of that term confirms these are the assets we're seeking. He turns to his security team. Secure the hangar. Thomas steps forward. This is private property. You have no authority here without a court order. Steele produces another document. Federal security warrant, signed by Judge Hamilton this morning. It authorizes us to secure any classified technology at this location, pending determination of rightful ownership. Coleman examines the warrant. This is limited to securing the perimeter. not seizing assets. Steele shrugs. Semantics, Coronet, will secure the assets in place until the legal questions are resolved. Behind them, Michael appears at the side entrance of the hangar, breathing hard from running. He catches Thomas's eye and gives a subtle thumbs up. The calls have been made. Coleman notices the exchange and imperceptibly relaxes. He turns back to Steele. Your warrant may allow you to secure the perimeter, but it doesn't authorize access to the aircraft themselves. They remain under Mr. Miller's legal control until a court rules otherwise. Steele studies Coleman carefully, then Thomas. Why don't we all take a step back? I'm sure we can resolve this amicably. Perhaps Mr. Miller would like to see the classified documentation regarding the Aurora platform's history. It might help him understand the situation better. He gestures toward the hangar interior. May I? Thomas hesitates, then nods. Coleman follows closely as they enter the hangar, Steele's security team trailing at a respectful distance. Steele stops when he sees the uncovered Aurora X-1. For a moment, his corporate mask slips, revealing genuine awe. Magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Do you have any idea what you're looking at, Mr. Miller? Thomas keeps his expression neutral. My father's life work. Steele circles the aircraft slowly, professional assessment in his gaze. This platform is decades ahead of anything currently in service. The propulsion system alone would revolutionize military aviation. The stealth characteristics are still classified above top secret. Steele smiles thinly. Is that what he told you? Did he also tell you about Operation Midnight? Thomas looks between Coleman and Steele. What's Operation Midnight? Coleman's expression darkens. There was no such operation. Steele reaches into his jacket and produces a small tablet. He taps the screen a few times, then turns it toward Thomas. This is classified footage from 1966, 1 year before Project Starlight was officially terminated. The video shows an Aurora aircraft, apparently the X-2, flying over what appears to be a remote testing range. Beneath it, a small object detaches and falls toward a target area. The resulting explosion is tactical nuclear scale. Thomas stares at the footage, then at Coleman, whose face has gone pale. You told me these aircraft couldn't be weaponized. Coleman shakes his head. This is fake. The Aurora platform was never armed. Harold's programming constraints would have prevented it. Steele's smile widens. Programming constraints, is that what he told you? The constraints were added after this test. Your father wasn't protecting these aircraft from weaponization, Colonel. He was hiding the evidence that they had already been weaponized. He turns to Thomas. Your father was the engineer who designed the weapons delivery system for the Aurora platform. When Kennedy was assassinated and the new administration wanted to expand the program's offensive capabilities, Harold Miller was their point man. Thomas feels the ground shifting beneath him. Everything he'd learned about his father in the past few hours, the humanitarian mission, the moral stand against weaponization, suddenly called into question. Coleman steps between Thomas and Steele. This is psychological manipulation, Thomas. Standard procedure for asset acquisition. Create doubt, offer money, then threaten. Your father was a man of principle who refused to weaponize these aircraft. Steele seems unperturbed. Ask yourself why a man with your father's brilliance would spend his life fixing lawnmowers in a small town. It wasn't humility, it was penance. The radio equipment suddenly crackles to life. Control's voice fills the hangar. Starlight Base, be advised, legal team confirms emergency injunction has been filed. Federal Judge Winters has issued a stay on any attempt to remove or alter assets at your location. Steele's expression hardens. He moves to the radio console, but Coleman blocks his path. That's private communication, Mr. Steele. Your warrant doesn't authorize interference with existing security systems. Steele steps back, reassessing the situation. His security team has subtly shifted positions, creating a perimeter around the aircraft. An injunction only delays the inevitable, Colonel. These assets will be secured by the proper authorities. Thomas finds his voice. My father left specific instructions. These aircraft are legally mine through a trust established decades ago. Any attempt to seize them without court order would be theft. Steele studies Thomas carefully. Your father was a complicated man, Mr. Miller, a brilliant engineer who helped create a weapon system, then spent his life hiding it out of guilt. Are you sure you want to defend his legacy? Before Thomas can respond, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaches. Everyone turns toward the hangar doors. Coleman smiles for the first time since Steele's arrival. That would be Senator Harrison's security detail, right on time. Steele's expression doesn't change, but his posture shifts subtly. He turns to his security team. Maintain perimeter security. No one touches the aircraft. The helicopter lands outside, bearing military markings rather than corporate logos. 4 men in formal suits exit, followed by an elderly man whose bearing suggests significant authority despite his age. Senator Frank Harrison enters the hangar with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Though in his 80s, his back is straight, his gaze sharp. The security detail flanking him are clearly military, not corporate contractors. Harrison surveys the scene quickly, his eyes lingering on the Aurora aircraft before focusing on the group. "Mr. Steele, somehow I'm not surprised to find you here." Steele's demeanor shifts to practiced respect. "Senator Harrison, this is unexpected. We're conducting a recovery operation under federal security warrant." Harrison's expression remains impassive. "I'm aware of your warrant, Mr. Steele. I'm also aware it was obtained through selective presentation of facts to Judge Hamilton. Judge Winters has superseded it with a federal injunction prohibiting any interference with these assets pending a full hearing." He turns to Thomas, extending his hand. "Mr. Miller, I'm Frank Harrison. I served with your father on the original Starlight team. I was the test pilot for the Aurora X-1 prototype." Thomas shakes the offered hand, feeling another shift in the unfolding drama. Harrison continues, "Your father was a man of extraordinary principle. These aircraft exist today because he refused to see them destroyed or perverted from their original humanitarian purpose." Steele interjects, "Senator, with respect, you're not cleared for the full history of Project Starlight, or its successor operations. The assets in question were redesignated for national security applications that remain classified." Harrison's gaze hardens. "Mr. Steele, I held Yankee White clearance when you were still in diapers. I was the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee for 15 years. There is no aspect of Project Starlight I am not aware of." He turns back to Thomas. "What Mr. Steele is attempting is an old tactic, using selective declassification of information to create a false narrative. The video he showed you was part of a simulation test using mock-up aerial vehicles, not the actual Aurora platform." Steele's composure slips slightly. "That footage is authenticated from DoD archives." Harrison's smile is cold. "The footage is authentic. The narrative you've attached to it is not. The test shown was from Project Dark Star, a parallel program using conventional aircraft painted to resemble the Aurora prototypes. A deliberate deception to mislead Soviet intelligence about our capabilities." He turns to Thomas. "Your father refused to weaponize the Aurora platform. When ordered to do so, he instead built in safeguards that made weaponization impossible. The programming constraints Colonel Coleman mentioned." Thomas looks between Harrison and Steele, trying to determine which version to believe. Harrison seems to sense his doubt. "Ask yourself this, Mr. Miller. If your father was truly the weapons designer, Mr. Steele claims, why would Aerodyne need these prototypes? They would simply use his designs. They want these aircraft precisely because they can't reproduce your father's work, particularly the constraints that prevent military applications." Steele's expression has hardened into a mask. "Senator, this discussion involves classified information that should not be shared with unauthorized personnel." Harrison's response is cutting. "Mr. Miller has the highest possible authorization for this program, direct inheritance from the project's chief engineer, sanctioned through executive order. If anyone is unauthorized to discuss these matters, it would be corporate contractors operating outside their jurisdiction." He turns to his security detail. "Please escort Mr. Steele and his team to the perimeter. They are not to approach the aircraft again without federal court authorization." Steele hesitates, measuring the situation. His security team is outnumbered by Harrison's military detail, and the legal ground has shifted. "This isn't over, Senator. National security assets can't be left in civilian hands." Harrison's expression doesn't waver. "These assets have been in civilian hands for over 40 years without incident. The courts will determine their proper disposition." As Steele and his team are escorted outside, Thomas finds himself alone with Harrison, Coleman, and Michael, who has been watching the confrontation from near the office area. Harrison turns to Thomas with a weary smile. Your father warned me this day would come. He spent decades preparing for it. Thomas studies the elderly senator. You knew my father well? Harrison nods. Harold Miller was more than a colleague. He was my friend. When I was shot down over the Gulf of Tonkin in '64, it was your father who redesigned the Aurora X-1 for extraction operations. He personally flew into North Vietnamese airspace to pull me out. Completely unauthorized, of course. He walks toward the aircraft, running his hand along the fuselage with the familiarity of a pilot who knows every inch of his plane. The Aurora platform was never meant to be a weapon, Mr. Miller. It was designed to save lives, to reach people no other aircraft could reach. Your father protected that mission for 40 years, often at great personal cost. Thomas follows him. If what you say is true, why did my father live in obscurity? With his skills, he could have worked anywhere. Harrison's expression grows somber. Because obscurity was the only safety. The technology in these aircraft, particularly the propulsion system and stealth characteristics, would have made him a target. Defense contractors, foreign intelligence, even elements within our own government would have pressured him to reproduce it for military applications. Coleman joins them. Harold chose a simple life because it was the only way to protect what mattered most to him, the humanitarian potential of his creation. Michael approaches cautiously. Is that why he never told us? To protect us? Harrison smiles at the teenager. Precisely. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone was. Your grandfather carried a burden few men could bear, knowledge that could change the world, but could also destroy it in the wrong hands. Thomas feels the weight of his inheritance growing. The aircraft, the legal battle brewing, the moral responsibility. It's overwhelming. What happens now? Harrison gestures to the hangar around them. Tonight, we secure this facility properly. Tomorrow, we meet with the legal team to prepare for the court hearing. Aerodyine will petition for seizure based on national security. We'll counter with the trust documentation and executive authorization. And if we lose? Harrison's expression grows serious. Then we move to Protocol 5, your father's final contingency plan. Thomas is about to ask what Protocol 5 entails when the radio crackles again. Control's voice sounds different, tense, urgent. Starlight Base, emergency alert. Satellite shows multiple vehicles approaching from the north access road. Not Aerodyne. Repeat, not Aerodyne. Military signatures, heavy transport configuration. Harrison and Coleman exchange alarm glances. Coleman moves to the radio. Control confirms signature pattern. The response is immediate. Delta 79, priority override. Coleman's face pales. How did they find us? Harrison's expression has hardened. Aerodyne isn't the only group that's been searching for the Aurora platform. It appears the Pentagon has entered the game. He turns to Thomas with sudden urgency. We need to activate Protocol 4 immediately. There's something your father hid from everyone, even me. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about Project Starlight. Thomas feels a chill at Harrison's tone. What are you talking about? Harrison's gaze is intense. The Aurora aircraft aren't just transport vehicles or potential weapons platforms. They're the key to something far more significant, something your father protected at all costs. He glances at his watch. We have perhaps 15 minutes before a full military containment team arrives. They'll lock down this facility and everything in it. Once that happens, your father's legacy disappears forever. Thomas looks to Coleman, who appears equally surprised by Harrison's words. Harrison continues, his voice lower. Your father left instructions for you, a final protocol in case all other options failed. It's time. Thomas feels caught in cross currents of loyalty, doubt, and mounting pressure. The senator's urgency seems genuine, but something doesn't feel right. Michael steps closer to his father, sensing his uncertainty. Dad, what's Protocol 4? Before Thomas can answer, Harrison moves toward the Aurora X-1 with surprising agility for a man his age. He reaches beneath the cockpit access panel and presses a sequence of hidden switches. To everyone's surprise, the aircraft's systems begin powering up, lights flickering across the control surfaces, a low hum building in the propulsion system. Coleman steps forward in alarm. Senator, what are you doing? The aircraft hasn't been flight checked for combat operations. Harrison turns, and Thomas sees something new in the elderly man's eyes, a cold calculation that wasn't there before. Combat operations. Thomas repeats the phrase slowly. You said these were humanitarian aircraft. Harrison's expression doesn't change. Every tool can serve multiple purposes, Mr. Miller. Your father understood that better than anyone. He reaches into his jacket and produces a small device that resembles a specialized key. As he inserts it into a port near the cockpit, Coleman moves forward. Senator, stop. That's a military override key. It will bypass the programming constraints. Harrison's smile is thin. Very good, Colonel. Harold's constraints were brilliant, but the military always builds in back doors, even to humanitarian projects. Thomas feels the ground shifting beneath him again. The certainties of minutes ago, his father's principles, the aircraft's purpose, Harrison's alliance, all called into question. You said my father refused to weaponize these aircraft. Harrison doesn't look up from his work. Harold Miller was an idealist who created something revolutionary, then couldn't bear to see it used for its most effective purpose. A waste of potential. Coleman's voice is tight with anger. You were his friend. You supported the humanitarian mission. Harrison pauses, turning to face them. I supported America's strategic interests. Sometimes that meant playing the humanitarian. Sometimes it meant recognizing that power must be exercised to be maintained. The reality dawns on Thomas with sickening clarity. Everything he's been told, by Coleman, by Harrison, even by his father's video, has been shaped by competing agendas. My father trusted you. Harrison's expression softened slightly. Your father was a great engineer but a political naive. He believed the world could be saved with humanitarian gestures. I believe in American strength. These aircraft represent power that should never have been hidden away. The distant sound of heavy vehicles grows louder. Harrison glances toward the hangar doors. The military containment team will be here soon. They'll secure these aircraft, but they'll bury them in classifications so deep they'll never fly again. Is that what you want for your father's legacy? Thomas looks to Coleman, whose expression confirms the truth of Harrison's words, if nothing else. What exactly are you proposing? Harrison gestures to the powered-up aircraft. We take the Aurora X-1 now, before they arrive. With its capabilities, we can reach any friendly nation before they can track us. Once there, we negotiate from position of strength. The technology, properly leveraged, is worth billions. Money. Thomas feels a surge of disgust. That's what this is about for you. Harrison's smile is cold. Money is power, Mr. Miller. Your father could have been a wealthy man. Instead, he chose obscurity and poverty. Are you going to make the same mistake? Michael steps forward, anger overcoming caution. My grandfather wasn't a mistake. He protected something important. Harrison regards the teenager with detached amusement. And what has that protection achieved? The world is still full of suffering. American power still wanes. These aircraft could have changed history. Coleman moves subtly, positioning himself between Harrison and the aircraft controls. Senator, this facility is under surveillance. Any attempt to remove the aircraft will be detected. Harrison's expression hardens. By whom? Control? That's been my operation for the past 15 years. After the original team retired, I quietly assumed oversight. The only real surveillance here is mine. Thomas feels the betrayal like a physical blow. Everything, the warnings about Aerodyine, the legal team, the injunction, all manipulated by Harrison. You set this up. Aerodyne, the confrontation, all of it. Harrison shrugs. Aerodyne is genuinely interested in the technology. I simply made sure they found it when I was ready for them to. They're the perfect distraction for what comes next. He glances at his watch again. We have 10 minutes before the containment team arrives. Enough time to power up the aircraft and clear the hangar. I can fly it. The question is whether you're coming with me. Thomas looks at the Aurora X-1, his father's life work, now being corrupted for personal gain. And if I refuse? Harrison's smile disappears. Then I leave alone and you explain to a military containment team why you're in possession of classified technology. Best case scenario, you spend years in court. Worst case, you disappear into a federal facility. Your choice. The tension is broken by a new sound, the distinctive click of a weapon being readied. Coleman has drawn a sidearm and points it steadily at Harrison. That's not going to happen, Frank. Harrison seems more annoyed than concerned. Don't be dramatic, Richard. You won't shoot a United States senator. Coleman's aim doesn't waver. I will to protect Harold's legacy. Step away from the aircraft. Harrison assesses the situation, then slowly raises his hands. As you wish. But as Coleman moves forward, Harrison presses a hidden control on the device in his hand. Suddenly, alarms blare throughout the hangar. Red warning lights flash along the walls. Coleman looks around in confusion. What have you done? Harrison's smile returns. Activated the self-destruct protocol. Another fail-safe the military built into Project Starlight. If the technology couldn't be controlled, it would be destroyed. The sound of an automated countdown echoes through the hangar speakers. 15 minutes to facility purge. All personnel evacuate immediately. Thomas grabs Michael's arm. We need to get out of here. Harrison's voice cuts through the alarm. The destruct sequence can only be aborted from the primary control station, which happens to be inside the Aurora X-1. Either we fly out together or everything your father built burns to the ground. Coleman keeps his weapon trained on Harrison. There is no self-destruct system. This is another manipulation. Harrison raises an eyebrow. Are you willing to bet everyone's lives on that? The original Starlight facilities all had purge protocols. Why would this one be different? Thomas studies Harrison's face, looking for deception. The senator's confidence is unshaken, and the alarms and countdown seem authentic. Can you really fly this thing? Harrison nods. I was the original test pilot. The controls haven't changed. The countdown continues. 14 minutes to facility purge. Coleman shakes his head. Thomas, this is exactly what he wants. Once the aircraft leaves U.S. soil, it becomes a rogue asset. The technology will go to the highest bidder. Harrison's expression hardens. The technology will serve American interests as it always should have. Your father denied his country a strategic advantage out of misplaced idealism. Thomas feels pulled between competing narratives, each compelling, each potentially false. His father's legacy, his own future, Michael's safety, all hanging in the balance. Coleman steps closer. There's something you don't know, Thomas. Something your father told only me in case this exact scenario ever occurred. Harrison's expression shifts subtly. More manipulation, Mr. Miller. We're running out of time. The countdown continues. 13 minutes to facility purge. Coleman continues, his weapon still trained on Harrison. Protocol 5 isn't what the senator thinks. It's not about destroying the facility or flying the aircraft out. It's about revealing the truth. Harrison's composure slips slightly. Don't listen to him. We need to leave now. The urgency in Harrison's voice triggers Thomas's suspicion. For the first time, the senator seems genuinely worried. Thomas turns to Coleman. What truth? Coleman never takes his eyes off Harrison. The Aurora aircraft contain flight recorders that have never been deactivated. Every mission, every conversation in the cockpit, every order given, all preserved, including the real reason Project Starlight was terminated. Harrison's expression darkens. Ancient history, irrelevant now. Coleman continues. Your father wasn't just concerned about weaponizing the Aurora platform. He discovered something far worse. In 1960, certain elements within the military leadership were planning an unauthorized first strike against Soviet installations. They intended to use the Aurora aircraft because they couldn't be traced back to the U.S. Thomas stares at Harrison, whose expression has hardened into stone. Coleman presses on. Harold sabotaged the mission by installing the programming constraints. When they discovered what he'd done, they ordered the entire program terminated and all assets destroyed. That's when your father and I, along with a few others, faked the destruction records and secured the aircraft here. Harrison's voice is cold. Ancient history, as I said. What matters now is preserving the technology. The countdown continues. 12 minutes to facility purge. Thomas looks at the control panel where Harrison inserted his key. A familiar pattern catches his eye, the same integration design his father used in the radio equipment they fixed together years ago. A redundant system with a manual override. Dad, look! Michael points to a small red light blinking on the device Harrison is holding. That's not military tech. It's a commercial remote trigger. Thomas sees it too. The device isn't government issue. It's a custom-built controller with commercial components. The kind of thing his father would have recognized instantly. There is no self-destruct system, is there, Senator? Harrison's smile fades. The alarm is real enough, and it will bring the military containment team running. We're still out of time. Coleman keeps his weapon steady. The facility is hardened against external communication. That's why we needed the Ridge transmitter. Your alarm won't reach anyone. Harrison's composure cracks. You fools! Do you have any idea what these aircraft are worth? The propulsion technology alone could redefine American air superiority for decades. Thomas moves to the aircraft's access panel, examining the integration point where Harrison inserted his key. There, a simple override switch, just like his father taught him to recognize. The programming constraints weren't just about preventing weapons delivery. They were about controlling who could fly the aircraft at all. He flips the switch. Immediately, the aircraft's systems power down, the lights dimming across the control surfaces. Harrison lunges forward, but Coleman intercepts him. The elderly senator's strength is surprising, but Coleman's military training gives him the advantage. In moments, Harrison is secured, his arms pinned behind him. Michael has found the source of the alarm, a portable system wired into the hangar speaker system. He disconnects it, and blessed silence falls. Thomas stands over Harrison, seeing not a respected senator, but a man consumed by power and greed. You never cared about the humanitarian mission, did you? Harrison's defiance hasn't diminished. The humanitarian mission was a naive fantasy. These aircraft were always meant to project American power. Your father didn't understand the real world. No, Thomas's voice is firm. My father understood perfectly. That's why he built safeguards that even you couldn't overcome. He understood that power without conscience destroys itself. The sound of approaching vehicles grows louder. Coleman checks the security monitors. Military transport. 3 vehicles. They must have been alerted by Aerodynes. Thomas makes a decision. It's time for Protocol 5. Coleman looks surprised. Are you sure? Thomas nods. My father protected these aircraft for 40 years because he believed in their purpose. I won't dishonor that by hiding them any longer. He turns to Michael. The hard drive from the safe. Get it. Michael retrieves the drive, handing it to his father. Thomas connects it to the computer console. Files appear on the screen. Hundreds of documents, photographs, and video recordings. All meticulously organized and annotated in Harold Miller's precise style. Operation Starlight, the complete record. Thomas activates the facility's satellite uplink. The system asks for authorization codes, the same sequence from his father's contingency instructions. What are you doing? Harrison demands. Thomas turns to him. My father didn't just protect these aircraft. He documented everything. The original humanitarian mission, the attempts to weaponize the platform, the unauthorized strike plans, everything. He kept it all as insurance. Coleman understands first. Protocol 5, full disclosure. Thomas nods. If the aircraft couldn't be protected, the truth would be revealed. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence, transmitted to major news organizations, congressional oversight committees, and international humanitarian groups. The complete, unredacted history of Project Starlight. Harrison's face drains of color. You can't. The classification alone would mean treason charges. Thomas activates the transmission sequence. My father's records include President Kennedy's original executive order establishing the humanitarian mission. It was never rescinded. The classification applies to military applications, not the original purpose. The console displays confirmation as the files begin transmitting. A list of recipients appears. The Washington Post, the New York Times, Congressional Intelligence Oversight, United Nations Humanitarian Office, and dozens more. Outside, vehicles come to a stop. Doors slam as military personnel establish a perimeter. Harrison struggles against Coleman's grip. You've destroyed everything. The technology will be buried forever now. Thomas looks at the Aurora aircraft, his father's legacy, not just of engineering brilliance, but of moral courage. No, Senator, I've saved it. Once the world knows what these aircraft were truly designed to do, they'll serve their original purpose. Reaching those no one else can reach. Helping those no one else can help. Coleman nods in approval. Your father would be proud. Michael stands beside Thomas, looking at the aircraft with new understanding. So what happens now? Thomas places a hand on his son's shoulder. Now we tell the truth, all of it, and trust that the world will recognize what my father always knew, that our greatest strength isn't in weapons or power, but in our capacity to help others. Heavy footsteps approach the hangar entrance. Military police in full tactical gear appear, weapons ready but not raised. Thomas straightens his shoulders, feeling the weight of his father's legacy, not as a burden now, but as a source of strength. Whatever comes next, the truth would finally be known. Operation Starlight would emerge from the shadows, and Harold Miller's vision would at last be fulfilled. A senior officer steps forward. This facility is now under the control of the United States Air Force. Who's in charge here? Thomas steps forward. My name is Thomas Miller, and I have quite a story to tell you. The Air Force officer steps forward, his insignia identifying him as Colonel James Westfield. His face remains impassive, but his eyes assess the scene with practiced efficiency. The uncovered Aurora aircraft, Senator Harrison restrained by Coleman, the activated computer systems, and the teenager hovering protectively near his father. Mr. Miller, I'm Colonel Westfield, Special Projects Division. We've been tracking unusual communications from this location. Care to explain why you're in possession of classified aerospace technology? Thomas holds out the credentials Coleman had given him. These aircraft legally belong to me, Colonel. Inheritance from my father, Harold Miller, under Executive Order 6, signed by President Kennedy. Westfield examines the credentials with raised eyebrows. These are authentic, but significantly outdated. The technology in question was ordered destroyed in 1967. The destruction was falsified, Colonel. My father was authorized to maintain these aircraft for their original purpose, rapid humanitarian response. I have documentation confirming legal ownership through a presidential trust that was never revoked. Harrison interjects. Colonel Westfield, this facility contains highly classified technology that poses a significant national security risk in civilian hands. I've been monitoring the situation for the Senate Intelligence Committee. Westfield's expression doesn't change, but his eyes narrow slightly. Senator Harrison, this is unexpected. My orders didn't mention your involvement. Thomas presses forward. Colonel, before we go further, you should know that complete documentation of Project Starlight has just been transmitted to multiple secure locations. The full history, including the original mission parameters, the attempts to weaponize the platform, and the falsified destruction records. Harrison struggles against Coleman's grip. He's bluffing, Colonel. The files are classified. Transmitting them would constitute treason. Thomas meets Westfield's gaze steadily. Not treason, Colonel. Transparency. The original executive order establishing Project Starlight as a humanitarian program was never rescinded. The classification applies to the military applications that were attempted later, applications my father prevented. Michael steps forward, holding up the empty hard drive case. The transmission is complete, sir, to multiple news organizations, congressional oversight committees, and humanitarian agencies. Westfield's radio crackles with a message. His expression shifts almost imperceptibly as he listens. Colonel Coleman adds, the aircraft were designed for humanitarian missions, Colonel Westfield. When certain elements attempted to repurpose them for offensive operations, Harold Miller installed programming constraints that physically prevented weaponization. That's why they were ordered destroyed. Westfield considers this information, then turns to his security team. Secure the perimeter. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. He returns his attention to Thomas. Mr. Miller, I need to see this documentation you claim to have. Thomas indicates the computer console. Everything is here, Colonel. 40 years of records maintained by my father, including the original Kennedy authorization and the trust documents establishing legal ownership. While Westfield reviews the files, Harrison makes one last attempt. Colonel, these aircraft represent critical national security technology. They can't remain in civilian hands. Westfield doesn't look up from the screen. With respect, Senator, I'll determine what represents a security risk. Based on these documents, it appears this situation is more complex than my briefing indicated. He straightens and turns to Thomas. Mr. Miller, I need to make some calls. In the meantime, nothing leaves this facility. Thomas nods. We understand, Colonel. We have no intention of moving the aircraft. My father protected them for 40 years. I can wait a few more hours. As Westfield steps away to communicate with his superiors, Coleman finally releases Harrison, though he keeps the pistol at his side. The senator straightens his jacket with wounded dignity. You've made a grave mistake, Miller. Once the Pentagon reviews the situation, they'll classify everything. Your father's legacy will disappear into a government warehouse. Thomas turns to Harrison, seeing now the full measure of the man his father had trusted and been betrayed by. That was always a possibility, Senator. But my father prepared for it. Protocol 5 isn't just about revealing the truth. It's about ensuring the aircraft serve their intended purpose, whatever happens next. For the next 6 hours, the hangar becomes the center of intense activity. Additional military personnel arrive, including technical specialists who examine the Aurora aircraft with barely concealed amazement. Harrison is escorted to a separate area for questioning, while Thomas, Michael, and Coleman remain under guard near the office section. Thomas watches as the specialists carefully document every aspect of the aircraft, their expressions shifting from professional assessment to genuine awe as they discover systems and materials decades ahead of their time. Michael leans closer to his father. What happens now? Thomas keeps his voice low. We wait. The Pentagon brass will be reviewing everything, the aircraft, the documentation, my father's records, and deciding whether to bury it all or acknowledge it. Coleman adds, the fact that Protocol 5 has been activated changes the equation. With the Starlight files now in the hands of news organizations and oversight committees, a complete cover-up is impossible. But they could still take the aircraft, right? Michael asks. Thomas nods. Legally, the trust documents should protect our ownership claim, but national security can override legal considerations. That's what my father was concerned about. As evening approaches, Colonel Westfield returns, his manner suggesting he's received new orders. Mr. Miller, I've been instructed to transport you, your son, and Colonel Coleman to Andrews Air Force Base. The aircraft will follow under separate escort. Are we under arrest, Colonel? Westfield's expression remains neutral. No, sir. You're being transported for a high-level consultation regarding Project Starlight and the disposition of the Aurora platform. Your cooperation would be appreciated. Thomas exchanges glances with Coleman, who gives a slight nod. We'll cooperate, Colonel, but I want to be clear. These aircraft legally belong to my family through my father's trust. Any attempt to seize them without due process will be challenged. Westfield's expression softens slightly. Understood, Mr. Miller. I'm following orders, not making policy. If it helps, I've been informed that General Eleanor Wright will be overseeing the consultation. Thomas recognizes the name from his father's contingency instructions, the senior officer who had helped establish the legal protections for the Aurora platform decades earlier. That does help, Colonel. Thank you. The military transport aircraft is Spartan but efficient, designed for utility rather than comfort. Thomas, Michael, and Coleman are seated in a separate compartment from the regular crew, with 2 Air Force security personnel stationed nearby, courteous but vigilant. As they fly east toward Washington, Michael stares out the small window at the darkening landscape below. They're taking the Aurora aircraft too? Thomas nods. In separate transports, probably with full security escorts. Coleman leans forward. The Aurora platform was designed for easy disassembly and transport, part of the original humanitarian mission parameters, the ability to deploy from various locations as needed. Michael looks troubled. Do you think we'll ever see them again? Thomas considers the question. The pessimistic answer would be no. The aircraft would disappear into classified storage, their technology studied and potentially weaponized despite his father's programming constraints. But something about Colonel Westfield's manner and the mention of General Wright suggests another possibility. I think we will. Not because the military wants to release classified technology, but because the Aurora platform can't fulfill its purpose locked away in a government hangar. Coleman nods in agreement. Your father designed those aircraft to save lives. Sooner or later, that purpose becomes more valuable than the secrecy surrounding them. The transport lands at Andrews Air Force Base well after midnight. Thomas, Michael, and Coleman are escorted to a secure building away from the main facilities, a nondescript structure with heightened security that suggests classified activities within. Colonel Westfield leads them to a conference room where coffee and sandwiches have been provided. General Wright will meet with you at 0800 hours. I suggest you get some rest. Quarters have been prepared for each of you. Thomas glances at the digital clock on the wall. 0230 Euro. Less than 6 hours before the meeting that would determine the fate of his father's legacy. Thank you, Colonel. One question. Has Senator Harrison been brought here as well? Westfield's expression remains professional, but something flickers in his eyes. Senator Harrison is being debriefed at a separate facility. That's all I'm authorized to say. After Westfield leaves, Coleman takes a sandwich and coffee, his military habits allowing him to function despite the late hour and stressful circumstances. Harrison will be facing serious questions, using his Senate position to manipulate classified information, conspiring with Aerodyine to acquire protected technology, attempting to override security systems. Those aren't minor infractions, even for someone with his political connections. Thomas isn't concerned about Harrison's fate. The senator had betrayed his father's trust, had planned to steal the Aurora aircraft for personal profit, had manipulated everyone involved. Whatever consequences he faced were of his own making. Michael, exhausted by the day's events, falls asleep on one of the couches. Thomas watches his son, thinking about the burden of knowledge now placed on his young shoulders. The same burden his father had carried alone for 40 years. Coleman seems to read his thoughts. Harold never wanted this for you, Thomas, or for Michael. He hoped the aircraft would remain secure until they could be properly acknowledged and utilized. Thomas nods. Protocol 5 was the last resort. He would have preferred a controlled revelation of the Aurora platform, not a crisis situation. Coleman sips his coffee. Protocol 5 was more than just a contingency plan. It was Harold's insurance policy. By distributing the complete documentation to multiple sources, he ensured the Aurora platform couldn't simply disappear. The world would know what it was designed for, what it could accomplish. My father always planned 3 steps ahead. Even with technology, he built in redundancies and fail-safes. The programming constraints, the trust documentation. Protocol 5, all designed to protect the aircraft's humanitarian purpose. Coleman's expression grows thoughtful. Harold was unique among engineers. Most of us focus on what technology can do. Harold always considered what it should do, and more importantly, what it shouldn't do. At precisely 0800, Colonel Westfield returns to escort them to a larger conference room. Inside, a group of military officials and civilian specialists are reviewing documents and technical readouts displayed on large screens around the room. At the head of the table sits General Eleanor Wright, a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and the direct gaze of someone accustomed to command. She rises as they enter. Mr. Miller, thank you for your cooperation during what must be a confusing and stressful situation. I'm General Eleanor Wright, Special Technologies Division. Thomas shakes her offered hand. General Wright, my father mentioned you in his contingency instructions. He seemed to trust you. Wright gestures for them to sit. Harold Miller was a colleague and a friend, Mr. Miller. We served together briefly during the original Starlight project before I was reassigned. When he initiated the preservation plan for the Aurora platform, I helped establish the legal framework, the trust documentation you now hold. She indicates the screens around the room, each displaying elements of the Starlight files, technical specifications, mission parameters, legal documents, and historical records. For the past 6 hours, we've been reviewing the complete Starlight documentation your father preserved. It's quite extraordinary, not just the technical achievements, but the foresight in preserving both the aircraft and their legal status. Thomas studies her carefully. And your conclusion, General? Wright's expression remains professional, but there's a hint of admiration in her eyes. The situation is unprecedented, Mr. Miller. The Aurora platform represents technology still classified at the highest levels. By rights, these aircraft should have been destroyed in 1967. The fact that they exist at all creates significant security and policy challenges. But your father's legal preparations were thorough. The Kennedy executive order establishing Project Starlight was never officially rescinded. The transfer of ownership through the classified trust was properly executed and documented. And the programming constraints built into the aircraft systems, preventing weaponization while preserving humanitarian capabilities, represent engineering brilliance of the highest order. She pauses, looking at each of them in turn. In short, Mr. Miller, your ownership claim is valid under U.S. law and executive authority. The Aurora platform legally belongs to your family trust. Thomas feels a surge of relief, quickly tempered by caution. This can't be the end of it. The military wouldn't simply acknowledge private ownership of classified technology and walk away. I sense there's more to discuss, General. Wright nods, her expression growing more serious. There is. While your legal claim is valid, these aircraft represent technology still decades ahead of current capabilities. We cannot allow them to operate without appropriate oversight and security protocols. Michael speaks up for the first time. But the programming constraints prevent military applications. They can only be used for humanitarian missions. Wright acknowledges this with a slight smile. Your grandfather's constraints are remarkable, young man. But security concerns go beyond potential weaponization. The propulsion system alone represents technology that could destabilize global aviation if widely replicated. She turns back to Thomas. We're proposing a compromise, Mr. Miller, one that honors your father's vision while addressing legitimate security concerns. I'm listening. The Pentagon is prepared to acknowledge the Aurora platform's existence and its original humanitarian purpose. The aircraft would remain the legal property of your family trust, but would operate under a joint civilian-military oversight program, the Starlight Humanitarian Response Initiative. Thomas considers this carefully. Who would control mission parameters? Wright gestures to one of her aides, who distributes folders containing detailed proposals. A civilian board with representatives from major humanitarian organizations, disaster response agencies, and medical emergency services. Military personnel would handle maintenance, security, and operational support, but mission approval would rest with the civilian board. And my role? You would serve as the trust representative on the oversight board, with full veto authority over any mission that contradicts the original humanitarian purpose. Additionally, we're proposing that your son, Michael, be included in the technical advisory team, given his apparent aptitude for engineering and his family connection to the platform. Thomas opens the folder, scanning the detailed proposal. The terms seem reasonable, even generous. The Aurora platform would finally serve its intended purpose while remaining under civilian humanitarian control. But decades of military service had taught him to look for the catch. And what does the Pentagon get from this arrangement, General? Wright's expression remains open, but her eyes sharpen slightly. Access to the technology, Mr. Miller, not to weaponize it. Your father's constraints make that impossible. But to study and potentially adapt elements of the propulsion system, stealth characteristics, and material science for other applications. Thomas looks to Coleman, who has been reviewing the proposal with a professional eye. These terms are fair, Thomas. The Aurora platform would fulfill its humanitarian mission while remaining under civilian control. The military gains knowledge but can't weaponize the specific technology. Wright adds, there's another consideration, Mr. Miller. Your father's Protocol 5 transmission has already reached several news organizations. By tomorrow morning, elements of the Starlight story will be public knowledge. This proposal allows us to acknowledge the program's existence while maintaining appropriate security around the most sensitive technical details. Thomas thinks about what his father would want. Harold Miller had protected the Aurora platform for 40 years, waiting for a time when it could serve its original humanitarian purpose. This proposal would finally allow that to happen while preserving civilian control over mission parameters. There's one more condition, General. Complete transparency on all missions. No classified operations, no off-book deployments. Everything documented and publicly reported. Wright nods. Those terms are already included in the proposal. President Kennedy's original vision, American technology serving humanitarian needs worldwide, without political constraints or hidden agendas. Thomas extends his hand. Then we have a deal, General Wright. 3 days later, Thomas stands in a secure hangar at Andrews Air Force Base, watching as technical specialists complete their examination of the Aurora X-1. The aircraft has been partially disassembled for thorough inspection, its revolutionary systems documented and analyzed by engineers who still seem amazed by what they're discovering. Colonel Westfield approaches, accompanied by General Wright. The technical assessment is complete, Mr. Miller. Despite being 40 years old, the Aurora platform incorporates systems we're only beginning to develop today. Your father was a remarkable engineer. Thomas nods. He never spoke about his work. Even basic repairs around the house were lessons in engineering principles. But he never mentioned the Aurora or Project Starlight. Wright gestures toward the aircraft. The restoration process will take approximately 3 months. Both Aurora units require system updates and component replacements, But the core technology remains sound. Your father's maintenance protocols were exceptional. And then the Starlight Initiative becomes operational. We've already received inquiries from the UN Disaster Response Agency and Doctors Without Borders about potential mission parameters. The capability to reach remote disaster areas within hours instead of days represents a humanitarian breakthrough. Michael joins them, having spent the morning with the technical team examining the propulsion system. His natural aptitude for engineering has impressed even the senior specialists. They're saying the fuel efficiency is still beyond anything we have today. How did Grandpa develop this in the 1960s? Wright smiles. Your grandfather was working on theories and applications that were decades ahead of conventional thinking. The Cold War pushed innovation in unexpected directions, and Project Starlight benefited from unique circumstances. Unlimited funding, exceptional talent, and a presidential mandate that prioritized humanitarian applications. She gestures for them to follow her to another section of the facility where large screens display news coverage from around the world. The Starlight story has broken internationally with varying degrees of accuracy and speculation. The official announcement is scheduled for 1500 hours today. The president will acknowledge Project Starlight's existence and announce the formation of the Starlight Humanitarian Response Initiative. We've prepared a carefully sanitized history that acknowledges your father's role while protecting the most sensitive technical details. Thomas watches the news coverage, analysts speculating about revolutionary humanitarian aircraft, classified Cold War technology, and Kennedy's secret legacy. The story has captured global attention, but the technical details remain secure, exactly as his father would have wanted. What about Senator Harrison? Wright's expression hardened slightly. Senator Harrison is cooperating with a Justice Department investigation into his connections with Aerodyine Corporation and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. His political career is effectively over. Thomas feels no satisfaction at Harrison's downfall, only disappointment that someone his father had trusted had betrayed that trust so completely. And Aerodyne? Their government contracts are under review. The attempted acquisition of classified technology through improper channels has triggered multiple investigations. They'll survive as a corporation, but with significant penalties and restrictions. Michael points to one of the screens where footage shows protesters gathering outside the Pentagon. Their signs demand technology for people, not weapons, and release the Starlight files. Some groups are calling for complete disclosure of all Starlight documentation, Wright explains. They believe the government is still withholding technology that could benefit humanity. Aren't they right, Thomas asks? The Aurora platform represents capabilities that could transform disaster response worldwide. Shouldn't that technology be shared? Wright's expression grows serious. The Aurora platform will serve humanity, Mr. Miller, but unrestricted dissemination of its technology would create more problems than it would solve. Not every government or organization shares your father's humanitarian priorities. Thomas understands the concern. His father had installed programming constraints precisely because he recognized the potential for misuse. Complete transparency about mission capabilities was appropriate. Unrestricted access to the technology itself was not. 1 month later, Thomas stands on the observation platform at Andrews Air Force Base, watching as the Aurora X-1 undergoes its first systems test since restoration. The sleek aircraft gleams under the hangar lights, its distinctive profile unlike anything in conventional aviation. Beside him, Michael points out features to Coleman, now serving as a technical advisor to the Starlight Initiative. The teenager's enthusiasm has transformed into focused expertise as he absorbs everything about his grandfather's creation. The Aurora's propulsion system spools up, its unique signature a low, pulsing hum, rather than the roar of conventional jet engines. Technical specialists monitor dozens of parameters, many still classified despite the program's partial disclosure. Coleman watches with professional appreciation. They've maintained the core systems exactly as your father designed them. The updates are primarily to interface components and communication systems, bringing the platform into the current century without compromising its fundamental capabilities. Thomas nods. The programming constraints, verified and intact, multiple testing protocols confirm they cannot be overridden or bypassed. The aircraft physically cannot perform military operations or surveillance missions. General Wright joins them, reviewing test data on her tablet. Initial systems check is green across all parameters. The X-1 could be flight-ready within 2 weeks. The X-2 will require another month of restoration. Thomas studies the aircraft that had defined his father's life, the creation Harold had protected for 4 decades at immense personal cost. When will the first humanitarian mission be scheduled? Wright consults her tablet. We have 3 mission profiles under consideration: earthquake response in Indonesia, medical supply delivery to remote regions in Central Africa, and emergency evacuation capabilities for an impending hurricane in the Caribbean. The Civilian Oversight Board will make the final selection next week. Thomas feels a complex mixture of pride and wistfulness. His father had never seen his creation fulfill its intended purpose, had never witnessed the Aurora platform operating in its designed role, reaching those who couldn't be reached, helping those who couldn't be helped. Michael seems to read his thoughts. Grandpa would be proud, Dad. His aircraft are finally going to do what he built them for. Thomas nods, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. He protected them for 40 years so they could serve when the time was right. He knew what he was building for. 2 weeks later, Thomas stands in the newly established Starlight Operations Center, watching as final preparations are made for the Aurora X-1's first official humanitarian mission. The large situation room contains workstations for mission controllers, medical specialists, and logistics coordinators, a blend of military efficiency and civilian humanitarian expertise. On the main screen, satellite imagery shows the earthquake-devastated region of coastal Indonesia, where conventional relief efforts have been hampered by destroyed infrastructure and remote villages cut off from access. General Wright reviews the mission parameters with the civilian director, Dr. Elaine Chen, a veteran of international disaster response operations. The Aurora platform will deliver emergency medical supplies and personnel to 3 locations conventional aircraft cannot reach. Total mission time, approximately 5 hours, compared to the 3 days conventional operations would require. Estimated impact: emergency care for over 800 victims currently without access to medical assistance. Thomas watches as the mission team completes final preparations. The Aurora X-1, now bearing the markings of the Starlight Humanitarian Response Initiative, has been loaded with precisely calculated medical supplies and staffed with emergency response personnel briefed on the aircraft's unique capabilities. Michael joins him, excitement evident in his expression. They're letting me observe from the secondary control center. I'll see everything as it happens. Thomas smiles. Your grandfather would be pleased, not just that the Aurora is finally serving its purpose, but that you're following in his footsteps. Dr. Chen approaches with a tablet. Mr. Miller, as trust representative, we need your final authorization for the mission. Thomas reviews the parameters, then enters his authentication code, part of the dual control system that ensures the Aurora platform remains dedicated to its humanitarian purpose. In the distance, the distinctive low hum of the Aurora's propulsion system builds as pre-flight checks are completed. Thomas watches on the monitors as the sleek aircraft taxis toward the runway. Decades of hidden potential finally about to be realized. As the Aurora accelerates, its revolutionary propulsion system allows it to reach takeoff speed in half the distance required by conventional aircraft. It rises steeply into the morning sky, banking gracefully before disappearing from view, bound for a mission of mercy halfway around the world. 6 months later, Thomas sits in his office at the Starlight Operations Center, reviewing mission reports from the past week. The Aurora platform, now including both original aircraft and the first of the new Phoenix models based on Harold's designs, has completed 23 humanitarian missions worldwide. The statistics are displayed on his screen. 1,782 lives saved through direct intervention. 12 remote disaster zones reached days before conventional response could arrive. 37 tons of emergency medical supplies delivered to otherwise inaccessible locations. His father's legacy in action. A knock at the door interrupts his thoughts. Colonel Westfield enters, carrying a worn leather folder. We found this during the final clearance of the Nevada hangar, Mr. Miller. It was hidden in a compartment we missed in the initial sweep. Thomas takes the folder. Inside is a single envelope addressed simply, "For Thomas, when it's all over." He recognizes his father's handwriting immediately. Another message, apparently intended to be found only after the Aurora platform was either secured or lost. Thank you, Colonel. After Westfield leaves, Thomas opens the envelope with careful fingers. Inside is a letter dated just weeks before Harold's final stroke. Thomas, if you're reading this, then Protocol 5 has been activated and the truth about Project Starlight is finally known. Whether the Aurora aircraft are now serving their intended purpose or locked away in some government facility, the burden of secrecy has been lifted. There's one last piece of the story I need to share, not for the world, but for you alone. In 1962, during the darkest days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was part of a team tasked with creating an aircraft that could deliver humanitarian aid to survivors of a nuclear exchange. President Kennedy believed that even if the worst happened, America had a moral obligation to help survivors worldwide. What no one knew, not Coleman, not Wright, not even Harrison, was that the Aurora platform was based on my personal design. Before joining the Air Force, I had been developing a revolutionary propulsion system for my doctoral thesis. When the military discovered my work, they recruited me and classified everything. The Aurora aircraft represent my life's work, but they were never meant to be hidden away. They were meant to save lives, to reach those who couldn't be reached by conventional means. When I realized certain elements wanted to weaponize them, I couldn't allow it. Not just because it betrayed Kennedy's vision, but because it perverted my own creation. The hardest part wasn't installing the programming constraints or falsifying the destruction records. It was living with the knowledge that technology that could have saved countless lives remained hidden. Every natural disaster, every humanitarian crisis where rapid response might have made a difference, each was a weight on my conscience. I chose secrecy over service because I believed the risk of weaponization was too great. I chose principle over immediate good. I've questioned that decision every day for 40 years. The reason I'm telling you this now isn't to justify my choices or seek absolution. It's to help you understand why I lived the life I did, why I remained in that small town, fixing radios and lawnmowers when I could have been designing spacecraft, why I kept my distance even from you. The Aurora wasn't just a project I worked on. It was my creation, my responsibility. Protecting it meant protecting the world from what it might have become in the wrong hands. That burden shaped every aspect of my life, including the father I was to you. I hope someday you can forgive my silence and understand that everything I did, including keeping you at arm's length, was to protect both the Aurora platform and you. Knowledge has consequences, Thomas. I carried those consequences so you wouldn't have to. Until now. Whatever happens next, know that I'm proud of the man you've become. Trust your judgment, protect what matters, and remember that sometimes the greatest service isn't in what we create, but in what we prevent. With love and respect, your father. Thomas reads the letter twice, then carefully folds it and returns it to the envelope. The final piece of the puzzle, not just his father's role in Project Starlight, but the personal cost of the burden Harold had carried for 40 years. The Aurora aircraft hadn't just been his father's professional responsibility. They had been his creation, his intellectual legacy. Yet he had hidden them away, denied himself recognition and reward, lived a life of deliberate obscurity, all to ensure they would serve their intended purpose when the time was right. 1 year later, Thomas stands with Michael on the observation deck overlooking the expanded Starlight Operations Center. Below them, mission controllers coordinate humanitarian responses worldwide, tracking the Aurora and Phoenix aircraft as they deliver aid to regions conventional aircraft cannot reach. General Wright joins them, reviewing the latest mission statistics. 57 successful deployments in the past year. Estimated lives saved, over 15,000. Your father's vision has exceeded our expectations, Mr. Miller. Thomas watches as a controller updates the mission board. Drought relief in North Africa, medical evacuation from a remote earthquake zone in Central Asia, supply delivery to flood victims in regions inaccessible by conventional aircraft. Michael, now pursuing aerospace engineering at MIT with a focus on humanitarian technology applications, points to a flashing indicator on one of the screens. The Phoenix Mark II completed its test flight. All systems nominal. Wright nods. Ready for operational deployment next week. hurricane response in the Caribbean. The Phoenix program represents the evolution of Harold's original design, incorporating modern materials and systems while maintaining the core capabilities and programming constraints that define the Aurora platform. A memorial ceremony is scheduled for next month, right, Ads? The president will posthumously award your father the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The new Humanitarian Response Research Center will be named in his honor. Thomas feels a surge of pride tempered by the knowledge that his father would have shunned such recognition. Harold Miller had never sought acclaim or reward, only the fulfillment of his vision for technology that served humanity's greatest needs. He would have hated all the attention. Wright smiled slightly, but he deserved it. What he did, preserving that technology while preventing its weaponization, it changed history, just not in the way anyone expected. Michael's expression grows thoughtful, not with a bang, but with a helping hand. Thomas thinks about his father's letter, about the burden Harold had carried alone for so many years. The distance he'd maintained, even from his own family, to protect them from the consequences of his knowledge. He would have been proud of you, Michael, following in his footsteps, but without the need for secrecy. Michael has already contributed several innovations to the Phoenix program, his natural talent for aerospace engineering, amplified by access to his grandfather's original designs. The revolutionary propulsion system Harold had developed as a doctoral student, now refined and enhanced by his grandson, powering aircraft that reached disaster victims within hours instead of days. A legacy of service spanning 3 generations. Wright checks her tablet as a new alert appears. Looks like we have a situation developing. Flash flooding in the Appalachian region. Remote communities cut off from conventional assistance. Thomas reviews the data as it appears on the main screen. Calculations show conventional rescue operations would take 30-40 hours to reach the most isolated areas. The Aurora platform could be on site within 90 minutes. Michael is already moving toward the technical section. I'll coordinate with the engineering team on payload configuration. Thomas watches his son go, seeing in him the same dedication to service that had defined Harold's life. But without the burden of secrecy, without the isolation his father had endured. General, please activate the Aurora X-1 for immediate deployment, full emergency medical team and rescue equipment. Wright nods, issuing the necessary orders. As activity in the operations center intensifies, Thomas feels a profound sense of completion. His father's creation, once hidden away in a desert hangar, now racing to save lives that would otherwise be lost. The legacy code his father had written, both in the Aurora's programming constraints and in the values he had lived by, continued to shape the world, one rescue mission at a time. On a quiet evening 6 months later, Thomas visits his father's grave in the small-town cemetery. The simple headstone bears only Harold's name, rank, and dates. No mention of his extraordinary achievements or the lives his creation had saved. Thomas places a small model of the Aurora X-1 at the base of the headstone, a prototype from the Starlight Museum exhibit that now tells the declassified story of Project Starlight. I wish you could see it, Dad. Everything the Aurora has accomplished, the lives saved, the difference it's making. It's exactly what you designed it for. He sits on the bench beside the grave, watching as the setting sun casts long shadows across the quiet cemetery. Michael is thriving at MIT. His professors are amazed by his insights into propulsion systems and aerodynamics. They don't know he grew up studying your designs, learning from the best without even realizing it. The Congressional Medal of Honor ceremony had been held the previous month, a posthumous award for Harold, with presidential presentation. The Harold Miller Humanitarian Response Center was now under construction, dedicated to advancing the technology of rapid disaster response. You were right about so many things, Dad, about the importance of constraints and safeguards, about the risk of technology without conscience, about choosing the harder path when principle demands it. As darkness falls, Thomas places a hand on the cool stone of the headstone. I understand now why you lived the life you did, why you made the choices you made, why you kept your distance, even from your family. You carried a burden so others wouldn't have to. You sacrificed recognition and reward to protect something important. In the distance, the distinctive sound of an Aurora aircraft passing overhead breaks the cemetery silence, likely returning from a training mission or humanitarian deployment. Thomas looks up, though the aircraft itself is invisible against the darkening sky. Your legacy lives on, Dad, not just in the aircraft or the technology, but in the lives saved and the example you set. You taught me that our greatest strength isn't in what we can build, but in what we choose to build. Not in the power we wield, but in how we constrain that power. Thomas rises, taking one last look at the simple headstone. The small-town cemetery seems an incongruously modest resting place for a man whose work now saved lives around the world. But it was fitting, too. Harold Miller had never sought recognition or reward. He had chosen principle over glory, service over acclaim. The Aurora aircraft soaring through distant skies, reaching those who couldn't be reached, helping those who couldn't be helped. That was monument enough. As Thomas walks back to his car, his phone chimes with a Starlight alert. Another mission activated, another opportunity for his father's creation to fulfill its purpose. The Aurora platform in constant motion, 40 years after its conception, finally serving humanity as Harold Miller had intended. The legacy code that would continue to guide the Starlight Initiative long after the original Aurora aircraft had completed their final missions. A code that couldn't be hacked, couldn't be corrupted, couldn't be repurposed for destruction. A code of honor, duty, and service, the true inheritance Harold Miller had left behind. Act 3, Resolution and Legacy. My name is Thomas Miller, and I have quite a story to tell you. The Air Force officer steps forward, his insignia identifying him as Colonel James Westfield. His face remains impassive, but his eyes assess the scene with practiced efficiency. The uncovered Aurora aircraft, Senator Harrison restrained by Coleman, the activated computer systems, and the teenager hovering protectively near his father. Mr. Miller, I'm Colonel Westfield, Special Projects Division. We've been tracking unusual communications from this location. Care to explain why you're in possession of classified aerospace technology? Thomas holds out the credentials Coleman had given him. These aircraft legally belong to me, Colonel. Inheritance from my father, Harold Miller, under Executive Order 1136, signed by President Kennedy. Westfield examines the credentials with raised eyebrows. These are authentic, but significantly outdated. The technology in question was ordered destroyed in 1967. The destruction was falsified, Colonel. My father was authorized to maintain these aircraft for their original purpose, rapid humanitarian response. I have documentation confirming legal ownership through a presidential trust that was never revoked. Harrison interjects. Colonel Westfield, this facility contains highly classified technology that poses a significant national security risk in civilian hands. I've been monitoring the situation for the Senate Intelligence Committee. Westfield's expression doesn't change, but his eyes narrow slightly. Senator Harrison, this is unexpected. My orders didn't mention your involvement. Thomas presses forward. Colonel, before we go further, you should know that complete documentation of Project Starlight has just been transmitted to multiple secure locations. The full history, including the original mission parameters, the attempts to weaponize the platform, and the falsified destruction records. Harrison struggles against Coleman's grip. He's bluffing, Colonel. The files are classified. Transmitting them would constitute treason. Thomas meets Westfield's gaze steadily. Not treason, Colonel. Transparency. The original executive order establishing Project Starlight as a humanitarian program was never rescinded. The classification applies to the military applications that were attempted later, applications my father prevented. Michael steps forward, holding up the empty hard drive case. The transmission is complete, sir, to multiple news organizations, congressional oversight committees, and humanitarian agencies. Westfield's radio crackles with a message. His expression shifts almost imperceptibly as he listens. Colonel Coleman adds, the aircraft were designed for humanitarian missions, Colonel Westfield. When certain elements attempted to repurpose them for offensive operations, Harold Miller installed programming constraints that physically prevented weaponization. That's why they were ordered destroyed. Westfield considers this information, then turns to his security team. Secure the perimeter. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. He returns his attention to Thomas. Mr. Miller, I need to see this documentation you claim to have. Thomas indicates the computer console. Everything is here, Colonel. 40 years of records maintained by my father, including the original Kennedy authorization and the trust documents establishing legal ownership. While Westfield reviews the files, Harrison makes one last attempt. Colonel, these aircraft represent critical national security technology. They can't remain in civilian hands. Westfield doesn't look up from the screen. With respect, Senator, I'll determine what represents a security risk. Based on these documents, it appears this situation is more complex than my briefing indicated. He straightens and turns to Thomas. Mr. Miller, I need to make some calls. In the meantime, nothing leaves this facility. Thomas nods. We understand, Colonel. We have no intention of moving the aircraft. My father protected them for 40 years. I can wait a few more hours. As Westfield steps away to communicate with his superiors, Coleman finally releases Harrison. Though he keeps the pistol at his side, the senator straightens his jacket with wounded dignity. You've made a grave mistake, Miller. Once the Pentagon reviews the situation, they'll classify everything. Your father's legacy will disappear into a government warehouse. Thomas turns to Harrison, seeing now the full measure of the man his father had trusted and been betrayed by. That was always a possibility, Senator. But my father prepared for it. Protocol 5 isn't just about revealing the truth. It's about ensuring the aircraft serve their intended purpose, whatever happens next. 3 days later, Thomas stands in an office at Andrews Air Force Base, watching through the window as officials from various government agencies examine the Aurora aircraft. They had been transported overnight from Nevada, now resting in a secure hangar surrounded by technical specialists and security personnel. The door opens and Colonel Westfield enters, accompanied by a woman in her 60s wearing an Air Force uniform with General's stars. Mr. Miller, this is General Eleanor Wright, Director of Special Technologies Division. Thomas recognizes the name from his father's contingency instructions. The woman Harold had trusted with legal protection for the Aurora platform. General Wright extends her hand. Mr. Miller, your father was a remarkable man. I've spent the last 3 days reviewing his documentation. Quite extraordinary. Thank you, General. Have you reached a decision about the aircraft? Wright gestures for Thomas to sit. The situation is unprecedented. Technically, your ownership claim is valid. The trust your father established was properly executed, and the Kennedy executive order was never officially rescinded. However, these aircraft represent technology still classified at the highest levels. We can't simply allow them to remain in private hands, regardless of the legal framework, as my father anticipated. Wright studies Thomas carefully. Yes, Harold was nothing if not thorough. His Protocol 5 transmission has created quite a stir in Washington. The Senate Intelligence Committee is holding emergency sessions. The White House has requested briefings. And 3 major news organizations are preparing to publish elements of the Starlight files. Senator Harrison must be furious. Wright's expression hardens. Senator Harrison is currently answering some difficult questions about his involvement with Aerodyine Corporation and unauthorized access to classified information. His political future is, shall we say, uncertain. And the aircraft? Wright looks out the window at the Aurora prototypes. That's what I've come to discuss with you. We've reviewed your father's programming constraints. They're truly remarkable. Integrated at such a fundamental level that removing them would render the aircraft inoperable. The Aurora platform can only be used for its original humanitarian purpose, just as my father intended. Wright nods, which presents us with a unique opportunity, Mr. Miller. One that honors your father's vision while addressing national security concerns. I'm listening. The Pentagon proposes a joint operation, the Starlight Humanitarian Response Initiative. The Aurora aircraft would be maintained by the Air Force, but operated under civilian oversight for global disaster relief and medical evacuation missions. Thomas considers the proposal. Who would control mission parameters? A civilian board with representatives from major humanitarian organizations, medical emergency services, and disaster response agencies. Military personnel would handle maintenance and support operations, but mission approval would rest with the civilian board. And ownership? Wright smiles slightly. A public-private partnership. The trust your father established would retain legal ownership, but operational control would be shared between civilian and military authorities. You would serve as the trust representative. Thomas looks out at the aircraft, his father's legacy now poised to fulfill its original purpose after 40 years of waiting. There's one more thing, General. My father's condition for any use of the Aurora platform. Complete transparency, no classified operations, no off-book missions, everything documented and publicly reported. Wright nods. Those terms are included in the proposed agreement. President Kennedy's original vision, American technology serving humanitarian needs worldwide, openly and without political constraints. Thomas extends his hand. Then we have a deal, General Wright. As they shake hands, Colonel Westfield clears his throat. There's something else you should see, Mr. Miller. He leads Thomas and General Wright to another hangar. Inside, a team of technicians work around what appears to be a newer, slightly larger version of the Aurora aircraft, though still in early construction phases. What is this? Westfield gestures to the prototype. Project Phoenix, based on your father's design principles, but updated with current technology. A next-generation humanitarian response platform. Wright adds, the programming constraints your father developed have been incorporated into the core systems. Like the original Aurora, it can only be used for humanitarian missions. Thomas walks around the prototype, seeing his father's influence in the aerodynamic design and integrated systems architecture. Does this mean the original Aurora aircraft won't be used? Wright shakes her head. The Aurora prototypes will be fully restored to operational status. This was my father's legacy to both of us. Wright smiles. Already arranged, Mr. Miller. We'll need technical staff familiar with your father's design philosophy. Michael's aptitude for engineering is evident in his school records. We're prepared to offer him an internship program that will allow him to contribute while completing his education. Thomas feels the weight that had pressed on him since discovering the hangar finally beginning to lift. His father's secret burden transformed into a shared purpose, a mission worthy of the sacrifice Harold had made. 6 months later, Thomas stands on the observation deck at Andrews Air Force Base, watching as the Aurora X-1 prepares for its first official mission. Beside him, Michael points out features of the aircraft to Coleman, now serving as technical advisor to the Starlight Initiative. The sleek aircraft gleams in the morning sun, its once secret technology now publicly acknowledged. On its fuselage, fresh markings, Starlight Humanitarian Response, alongside the original Project Starlight emblem. The pilot approaches, a woman in her 30s with the focused demeanor of someone accustomed to critical missions. Mr. Miller, we're ready for final authorization. Thomas reviews the mission parameters on the tablet she offers. Earthquake response in the Philippines. Medical supplies and emergency personnel. 8-hour estimated response time compared to the 24 hours conventional aircraft would require. He enters his authorization code, part of the dual control system that ensures the Aurora platform remains true to its humanitarian purpose. Godspeed, Captain Chen. Make my father proud. The pilot salutes, then heads toward the aircraft. Thomas watches as the ground crew completes final preparations, the distinctive low hum of the Aurora's advanced propulsion system building as systems power up. Coleman joins Thomas at the window. Harold would be amazed to see this day. His vision finally realized. Thomas nods. After 40 years hidden in that hangar, the Aurora is finally fulfilling its purpose. A senior Air Force officer approaches, carrying a small wooden box. General Wright sends her apologies for not being here personally. She asked me to give you this. Thomas opens the box to find a brass plaque engraved with the Starlight emblem and an inscription, in honor of Technical Sergeant Harold Miller, whose vision, courage, and unwavering principles preserved this technology for its true purpose. To reach those who cannot be reached, to help those who cannot be helped. The Starlight Initiative stands as his legacy. Thomas runs his fingers over the engraved words, emotion tightening his throat. The officer continues. The plaque will be mounted in the Starlight Operations Center. General Wright felt you should see it first. Thank you, my father would be honored. As the officer departs, Michael joins his father. The Aurora X-1 now fully powered, preparing for takeoff. Dad, there's something I've been wondering. Why did Grandpa choose you? He could have left instructions for Coleman or Wright to find the aircraft after he died. Thomas considers the question, thinking back to the video message his father had left, the notebook entries spanning decades, the carefully maintained aircraft. Because he knew I'd understand the choice he made, not the technical aspects or the political complexities, but the fundamental principle, that technology should serve humanity, not threaten it. Michael nods slowly. He trusted you to make the right decision, even though he never told you anything about Starlight. Thomas smiles. He told me everything that mattered, just not in words. Every time we fixed something together in his shop, every time he showed me how to build something that would last, every time he chose integrity over advantage. The Aurora X-1 begins to taxi toward the runway, its mission finally aligned with its design, not as a weapon or a secret, but as a tool for reaching those in desperate need. Do you think we'll ever know everything about Project Starlight? Michael asks. There are still classified files the Pentagon hasn't released. Thomas shakes his head. Some secrets stay buried, son. But the important truth is out there now. That 40 years ago, a group of engineers and pilots created something extraordinary. Not to threaten or dominate, but to help and heal. As the Aurora accelerates down the runway, its unique propulsion system allows it to reach takeoff speed in half the distance of conventional aircraft. It rises steeply into the morning sky, banking gracefully before disappearing into the clouds, bound for a mission of mercy halfway around the world. 1 year later, Thomas stands with Michael on the platform overlooking the Starlight Operations Center, a new facility built specifically for the initiative. Below them, technicians monitor missions worldwide, tracking the Aurora aircraft and the newly completed Phoenix prototype. Large screens display disaster zones, medical emergencies, and humanitarian crises where conventional response would be too slow or impossible. General Wright joins them, reviewing the latest mission statistics on her tablet. 6 successful deployments this month alone. Estimated lives saved, over 1,200. Your father's vision has exceeded our expectations, Mr. Miller. Thomas nods, watching as a technician updates the mission board. Drought relief in North Africa, medical evacuation from a remote earthquake zone in Central Asia, supply delivery to flood victims in regions inaccessible by conventional aircraft. Michael, now in his first year of aerospace engineering studies, points to a flashing indicator on one of the screens. The Phoenix completed its test flight, all systems nominal. Wright smiles, ready for its first operational mission next week. Hurricane response is the Caribbean. Thomas feels a complex mixture of pride and wistfulness. His father had sacrificed so much to protect the Aurora platform, living a life of deliberate obscurity while carrying the burden of a world-changing secret. He had never seen his creation fulfill its purpose. General, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. The documents my father left mentioned other engineers who helped him preserve the Aurora aircraft. What happened to them? Wright's expression grows somber. Most are gone now. Some lived ordinary lives like your father, keeping their involvement secret to the end. Others continued working in aerospace, subtly influencing design toward humanitarian applications. All of them carried the burden of knowing what might have been and what almost was. The true heroes of Project Starlight, not the politicians or military leaders who authorized it, but the engineers and technicians who preserved its humanitarian purpose despite the pressure to weaponize it. Wright nods. Your father wasn't alone in his principles, but he was unique in his foresight. The programming constraints, the documentation, the contingency protocols. He planned for every possibility. Thomas looks around the operations center, at the mission controllers coordinating the Aurora's global response capability, at the engineers refining the Phoenix platform for even greater humanitarian reach. He still had doubts, though. Coleman told me that toward the end, my father questioned whether he'd made the right choice, keeping the technology hidden for so long when it could have been helping people. Wright considers this. Many lives might have been saved if the Aurora platform had been operational earlier. But without your father's protection, it might never have served its humanitarian purpose at all. Technology this advanced would have been weaponized, regardless of the original intent. Sometimes preserving the right path requires patience. Your father understood that. Michael, who has been examining the mission status boards, suddenly turns to Thomas. Dad, look at this. He points to a newly activated mission request, a medical emergency in a remote region of Arizona, near their hometown. A hiking accident in terrain too rugged for conventional medical evacuation. Thomas looks at the coordinates, recognition dawning. That's Miller's Ridge, where we used to hike with Mom. Wright checks her tablet. Aurora X2 is the closest response unit. Estimated time to site, 22 minutes. Conventional medevac would take over 2 hours. She looks up at Thomas. Your authorization, Mr. Miller? Thomas enters his code, activating the mission. As the Aurora X-2 is prepared for deployment, he feels a sense of completion. His father's legacy had come full circle, the technology once hidden in the Nevada desert now racing to save lives in the wilderness, where Thomas had once walked with his family. That evening, Thomas sits alone in his office at the Starlight facility, reviewing mission reports. The rescue at Miller's Ridge had been successful. A father and daughter hikers now safely receiving medical care instead of waiting hours for conventional evacuation. A knock at the door interrupts his thoughts. Colonel Westfield enters, carrying a worn leather folder. Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Miller. We found this during the final clearance of the Nevada hangar. It was hidden in a compartment we missed in the initial sweep. Thomas takes the folder. Inside is a single envelope addressed simply, "For Thomas, when it's all over." He recognizes his father's handwriting immediately. Another message, apparently intended to be found only after the Aurora platform was either secured or lost. Thank you, Colonel. After Westfield leaves, Thomas opens the envelope with careful fingers. Inside is a letter dated just weeks before Harold's final stroke. Thomas, if you're reading this, then Protocol 5 has been activated and the truth about Project Starlight is finally known. Whether the Aurora aircraft are now serving their intended purpose or locked away in some government facility, the burden of secrecy has been lifted. There's one last piece of the story I need to share. Not for the world, but for you alone. In 1962, during the darkest days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was part of a team tasked with creating an aircraft that could deliver humanitarian aid to survivors of a nuclear exchange. President Kennedy believed that even if the worst happened, America had a moral obligation to help survivors worldwide. What no one knew, not Coleman, not Wright, not even Harrison, was that the Aurora platform was based on my personal design. Before joining the Air Force, I had been developing a revolutionary propulsion system for my doctoral thesis. When the military discovered my work, they recruited me and classified everything. The Aurora aircraft represent my life's work, but they were never meant to be hidden away. They were meant to save lives, to reach those who couldn't be reached by conventional means. When I realized certain elements wanted to weaponize them, I couldn't allow it. Not just because it betrayed Kennedy's vision, but because it perverted my own creation. The hardest part wasn't installing the programming constraints or falsifying the destruction records. It was living with the knowledge that technology that could have saved countless lives remained hidden. Every natural disaster, every humanitarian crisis where rapid response might have made a difference, each was a weight on my conscience. I chose secrecy over service because I believed the risk of weaponization was too great. I chose principle over immediate good. I've questioned that decision every day for 40 years. The reason I'm telling you this now isn't to justify my choices or seek absolution. It's to help you understand why I lived the life I did. Why I remained in that small town, fixing radios and lawnmowers when I could have been designing spacecraft. Why I kept my distance, even from you. The Aurora wasn't just a project I worked on. It was my creation, my responsibility. Protecting it meant protecting the world from what it might have become in the wrong hands. That burden shaped every aspect of my life, including the father I was to you. I hope someday you can forgive my silence and understand that everything I did, including keeping you at arm's length, was to protect both the Aurora platform and you. Knowledge has consequences, Thomas. I carried those consequences so you wouldn't have to. Until now. Whatever happens next, know that I'm proud of the man you have become. Trust your judgment. Protect what matters. And remember that sometimes the greatest service isn't in what we create, but in what we prevent. With love and respect, your father. Thomas reads the letter twice, then carefully folds it and returns it to the envelope. The final piece of the puzzle, not just his father's role in Project Starlight, but the personal cost of the burden Harold had carried for 40 years. The Aurora aircraft hadn't just been his father's professional responsibility. They had been his creation, his intellectual legacy. Yet he had hidden them away, denied himself recognition and reward, lived a life of deliberate obscurity, all to ensure they would serve their intended purpose when the time was right. Thomas looks out the window at the Starlight facility, where the Aurora X-1 is being prepared for its next mission. Tomorrow it would deliver emergency medical supplies to an earthquake zone in South America, reaching victims hours before conventional aid could arrive. His father's creation finally fulfilling its purpose, not as a weapon or a secret, but as a lifeline to those in desperate need. 2 years later, Thomas stands at his father's grave, a simple marker in a small-town cemetery. Beside him, Michael adjusts the fresh flowers they've brought, while Coleman waits respectfully a few steps away. The Starlight Initiative has grown beyond anyone's expectations. The Aurora platform now includes 6 operational aircraft, the 2 originals and 4 Phoenix models, each dedicated to humanitarian response worldwide. Over 15,000 lives saved through rapid medical evacuation and emergency supply delivery. Disaster response times reduced by 70% in remote regions. Harold Miller's vision, fully realized. Michael places a small model of the Aurora X-1 at the base of the headstone, a prototype from the Starlight Museum exhibit that now tells the declassified story of Project Starlight. I wish he could have seen it, Dad. Everything the Aurora has accomplished. Thomas nods, his hand resting on the headstone. He saw it, son, not with his eyes, but in his mind. Every detail, every capability, every mission. He designed it to save lives, and that's exactly what it's doing. Coleman joins them, placing a folded American flag beside the flowers. The Congressional Medal of Honor ceremony is scheduled for next month. Posthumous award for Harold, with presidential presentation. They're naming the new Humanitarian Response Center after him. Thomas smiles slightly. He would have hated all the attention. But he deserved it, Coleman adds. What he did, preserving that technology while preventing its weaponization, it changed history, just not in the way anyone expected. Michael runs his hand over the model aircraft, not with a bang, but with a helping hand. Thomas thinks about his father's letter, about the burden Harold had carried alone for so many years. The distance he'd maintained, even from his own family, to protect them from the consequences of his knowledge. He would have been proud of you, Michael, following in his footsteps, but without the need for secrecy. Michael, now in his final year of aerospace engineering, had been instrumental in the Phoenix platform development, his natural aptitude for design amplified by access to his grandfather's original work. The groundbreaking propulsion system Harold had developed as a doctoral student, now refined and enhanced by his grandson, powering aircraft that reached disaster victims within hours instead of days. A legacy of service spanning 3 generations. As they walk back to the car, Thomas pauses for one last look at his father's grave. The small-town cemetery seems an incongruously modest resting place for a man whose work now saved lives around the world. But it was fitting too. Harold Miller had never sought recognition or reward. He had chosen principle over glory, service over acclaim. The Aurora aircraft soaring through distant skies, reaching those who couldn't be reached, helping those who couldn't be helped. That was monument enough. Thomas slides into the driver's seat, checking his phone for Starlight mission updates. A new deployment to flood zones in Southeast Asia, another to a remote medical emergency in the Arctic. The Aurora platform in constant motion, fulfilling the purpose for which it had been designed 60 years earlier. Ready to head back to the center? Coleman asks from the passenger seat. Thomas nods, starting the engine. The Starlight Initiative doesn't sleep, neither did my father, from what I remember. As they drive away from the cemetery, Thomas feels the familiar weight of responsibility, not as a burden now, but as a purpose. His father had protected the Aurora platform for 40 years, ensuring it would serve humanity rather than threaten it. Now Thomas continued that mission, expanding its reach and impact while maintaining the principles Harold had embedded in its very design. The legacy code his father had written, both in the Aurora's programming constraints and in the values he had lived by, continued to shape the world, one rescue mission at a time. Back at the Starlight Operations Center, Thomas watches as the Aurora X-1 returns from its mission, touching down with the precision and grace that had made it legendary among the pilots authorized to fly it. Even with newer Phoenix models now operational, the original Aurora aircraft remained the heart of the initiative, living history still serving its intended purpose. On the mission board, the statistics update automatically. 17,042 lives saved, 1,243 emergency supply deliveries, 892 medical evacuations from inaccessible regions. Numbers that represented not just operational success, but the fulfillment of a vision that had been worth protecting, worth sacrificing for, worth passing on from father to son to grandson. Thomas Miller had inherited more than aircraft and technology. He had inherited a principle that humanity's greatest achievements should serve its greatest needs. That power without compassion destroys itself. That sometimes the most important legacy isn't what we create, but what we prevent. Lessons written not in his father's words, but in his choices. Not in speeches, but in sacrifice. The legacy code that would continue to guide the Starlight Initiative long after the original Aurora aircraft had completed their final missions. A code that couldn't be hacked, couldn't be corrupted, couldn't be repurposed for destruction. A code of honor, duty, and service, the true inheritance Harold Miller had left behind. 5 years after the establishment of the Starlight Initiative, Thomas Miller stands at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, where a memorial has been dedicated to the men and women of Project Starlight. The black granite stone bears no names, many still classified, but carries a simple inscription. They chose conscience over convenience, humanity over power. The Aurora X-1 flies over the ceremony in a final salute, its distinctive profile now recognized worldwide as a symbol of American humanitarian response. After nearly 300 missions and an estimated 42,000 lives saved, the original prototype is being retired to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, its classified status finally fully lifted. The American people have a right to know the truth about Starlight, even the uncomfortable parts. The project's declassification hasn't been neat or easy. Some careers ended. Some reputations were tarnished. The Senate Intelligence Committee's final report documented how Cold War paranoia nearly converted a humanitarian mission into a first-strike weapons platform. How bureaucracy and secrecy almost buried one of America's greatest achievements. But the report also acknowledged the quiet heroes, engineers like my father who refused to compromise their principles, military officers who risked their careers to preserve something important, government officials who created the legal framework that eventually allowed the truth to emerge. Systems fail, organizations lose their way. That's why individual conscience matters so much. My father understood that power without restraint destroys itself, that technology without moral guidance becomes a threat rather than a tool. His programming constraints weren't just clever engineering, they were a declaration of principle. The Phoenix fleet now numbers 12 aircraft, stationed strategically around the world. When disaster strikes, when conventional response isn't enough, they reach those who can't be reached. Just as Kennedy envisioned during the darkest days of the Cold War. Just as my father hoped during those 40 years of patient waiting. Michael graduates next month, top of his class at MIT. He's already accepted a position with the Starlight Research Division, working on the next generation of humanitarian response technology. The Aurora's legacy extends beyond hardware to a philosophy of service that shapes how we develop and deploy advanced systems. We still face resistance, of course. Some military planners argue that humanitarian technology shouldn't be constrained, that America needs every possible advantage in an uncertain world. Some politicians suggest the Starlight Initiative gives away capabilities that should be reserved for national interests alone. But the annual operational statistics speak for themselves. Earthquake victims reached within hours instead of days. Medical evacuations from regions conventional aircraft cannot access. Emergency supplies delivered to crisis zones regardless of political boundaries or strategic value. Not every Cold War secret deserves to remain buried. Sometimes what we hide from ourselves is exactly what we need most. The Aurora platform wasn't just ahead of its time technologically, it represented an idea that took 50 years to accept. That America's greatest strength isn't in our capacity to destroy, but in our commitment to preserve. Not in the threats we can make, but in the help we can offer. I've come to understand why my father lived as he did, choosing obscurity over recognition, principle over profit. He saw beyond the immediate pressures of the Cold War to a time when technology could fulfill its higher purpose, when American ingenuity could serve humanity without political constraints or hidden agendas. The Aurora flies its final mission next week, a ceremonial medical supply delivery to a remote hospital in the Appalachian Mountains, not far from where my father grew up. After that, it becomes history, preserved behind museum glass for future generations to study and admire. But the legacy continues in ways my father never could have imagined. The programming constraints he developed now form the basis for ethical guidance systems in autonomous vehicles and medical devices. The integration principles he pioneered shape how we approach artificial intelligence and automated decision-making. His insistence that technology serve humanity rather than threaten it has become standard language in engineering ethics courses nationwide. As we move forward into an uncertain future, facing challenges my father couldn't have foreseen, his fundamental insight remains our guiding principle. That America is at its best when our technological power is matched by moral purpose, when our capabilities are guided by conscience, when we reach for the stars not to claim them, but to light the way for others. The Aurora's time has passed, but the code my father wrote, not just in software but in the values he lived by, will continue guiding us long after the last aircraft has completed its final mission. That is his true legacy, and it's one worth protecting.